There's our intro.
Great.
We,
Wonderful intro music.
yeah, we still have an intro to make, but got people joining us already this morning. So got barbecue out there. Just putting a second thumbs up out there. Thank you for that. Or else he's just saying it's the second. So Second Amendment. Either way, thanks. Got Gunpowder Beauty out there this morning. Looks like you got work going on at the house. Susan, worthwhile fun, also out there. Good morning and playing the nut. So we got a bunch of people joining us on Tuesdays. Clover and I started getting together last year. I don't know. At some point we'll figure out what number of show this is. But we started getting together to kind of prep and introduce and talk about and really just talk about SHOT Show in lots of different ways. And we kept doing that. Kind of calling it Gun Channels Coaching, reminiscent of gun channels back in the day. And I do have gun channels sort of set up to be a coaching project. I'm going to still hone that a little bit. But until we come up with a better name and a better intro, we talk about content creation, specifically for people who are creating content that is focused on the Second Amendment or what the Second Amendment protects, firearms, guns, the gun culture, the gun industry in the United States. Posting stuff on the YouTubes, on the Instagrams, on the Facebooks and Twitters and all the other platforms that are out there, but really talking about sharing our Second Amendment with our First Amendment. And in 2023, that means online, and that means using other people's pipes and tubes and playing well with others. So there's lots of things to talk about. One of those is having something to talk about, right? And talking to somebody. So tonight we're talking about, I don't know how I spelled guests, interviews, and collaboration. So I guess I'll be editing some spelling here.
Gussets. Yeah.
Yeah, gussets. Yeah. So let's talk less about the roof and more about the people that are underneath the roof. So why don't you get started on chatting about that, and I'll start editing.
Yeah, I mean, I can start out by saying, since we're talking about, guest interviews, collaborations, just a real quick side note, and I think that this is probably something that we can go down a whole different rabbit hole on. So probably not lean too heavily into it this show, the actual idea of, translation of what somebody would see like we're doing here, a YouTube live stream, translation over into the audio podcast world. But just keep that little thing in the back of your mind that anytime that you do this type of format and you go live and you have a discussion, you have a conversation, it's an interview setting, whatever it might be, right? If you just tweak a few little things, right, you can make it audio compliant, right? And for those that are visually impaired that are out there on YouTube, and there are plenty of people that are visually impaired that are on YouTube, they totally get what I'm understanding anyway. And so, devising and making your live stream or your whatever, maybe it's not even a stream, maybe it's pre-recorded and you put it over here on YouTube, making that conversation and everything a little more conducive to those that don't have the visual aspect. When you do that, it's too easy.
You said compliant, and I think you meant compliant. Whatever that second word you said was. I just wanted to throw that out there because I was running around going compliant. Because when we talk compliant, most of the time we're talking like terms of service and stuff. So
yeah, this is true. Really yeah. Conducive to podcast. Yeah, make it conducive to an audio podcast. Yeah.
Good. In other words, don't disregard the audio, which I did for a long time. I still do compared to a lot of people, but anyway, I'll quit interrupting. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. I was vamping there till you got back, just to kind of put that little bug in everybody's ear, and maybe we'll get into that with taking your lives to podcast and that sort of thing on a future one. But
right off the bat, then that takes us to then right off the bat that there's, when we're talking about having guests on a show, guests to a project, collaborations is a little bit different, but interviews and guests, I guess. I'm thinking scheduling. I guess when I was thinking, and I'm thinking scheduling and how to find somebody and how to approach them, where almost we're talking technically bringing somebody on and having somebody, it's different microphones, it's different strategies for the conversation. So which way do we want to start with? How to get the guest, or once you've got the guest, how to include the guest technically? Let's imagine really one is the other. You can't do one without the other. So it's one, I guess. Technically, you got to have a guest before you can have somebody on, but you can often you find yourself with somebody on, then you realize, oh wait, I have guests.
Uh-huh.
And
Well,
it's hard on the internet to have somebody join you. In other words,
that's true, but there's a difference between I'm going to throw the link out there or whatever, or let's get people in, and here's the topic, right? There's a big difference than
right?
from
Let's have a
that.
round table discussion. Anybody can join, or people can join if they blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Versus I'm having so and so on to talk
Mhm.
about XYZ today.
Yeah, specific. And then there's also, if you're talking about bringing in guests, and the ultimate goal is to create um, is to increase the reach and exposure and everything else for that guest, that be it an industry guest, an organization, an advocate, whatever that guest might be. Um, that's the overall goal. And if that's the overall goal, then you know you want to be good at conversation. You want to be good. You want to be good at steering conversation. Um, and it certainly helps, I think, to do the recording, and that's why I do my podcasts. I record them live. Is you know, even though they end up being sort of random times of the day, and we'll talk about why that is here a little later on. But um, you do get some audience interaction, so questions that I might not be thinking about going down, follow ups and different things that I might not be thinking about, and I think that's important to get the maximum effect for whoever that guest is, because you want to respect the fact that they're taking time to come on your podcast. They should also be grateful for the exposure they're getting. Don't get me wrong; it's a two-way street. But at the same time, I mean, you want to respect their time. And it's not just, well, I brought this person in and I don't really know them that well, and the audience doesn't know them that well, but we're just going to sit around and talk about things that are non-related to what they do, right? There are cases where that can be fun, if that's somebody that the audience has already been exposed to. And a good example with me is Tony Simon. I've had Tony on a lot. Tony's on a lot of other podcasts, right? My audience, for the most part, knows who Tony is. So, when I bring
Who's
Tony
Tony?
on,
Tony
we
Simon. Okay. I'll look him up.
right, right. And so I, the last couple of times we've had him on, we just have fun. We call it, like a no 2A zone, or, FUD talk, or, something like that. And we bring him in, and we just talk about meal serps, and we talk about other things to give him a break more than anything, from what he normally talks about, and to show also, in a different light. So as you have guests on, I guess is what I'm saying, multiple times, the decorum, right? The flow of the show, the type of show, that can change and be different as well. Um, Thinking about this and what you're talking about, guests and interviews and collaborations, I think that, you know, probably the starting point, and I don't know if we surpassed that and need to back up or not, but probably the starting point is how do you get the guests, right? Like, that's probably a question that some people have, that maybe they thought about starting a podcast or a live stream, and they're like, well, how do you get these guests to come on?
Well, like I say, that's I think one of the aspects that at least I was thinking when I was kind of putting this together. When you were mentioning maybe the what you were talking about last night, Jimmy, just made me think of it that way. Um, so what you can have your ideal, like your list of your wish list, and then you can have your necessity list, and then another list. I don't know what that third one would be, because it's going to be a little bit from each, I would imagine, plus. Um, so I don't know, where were you thinking though, as you kind of started that? How there's so many ways to there's so many things to approach and ways to approach them when we talk about content creators bringing people in as guests. We want to say like the the big guests, the ones that are the people, the ones that you're going to set the table and use the good china for, or do we want to talk about having friends over and thinking of them as guests and not just your friends from across the street or from work?
You kind of muddied it. That would go almost like you ghosted me. You lost me.
Yeah, I was thinking, I'm sitting here going, I'm not sure which way to take it, and I'm
Mhm.
just answering my own questions. So,
Like, how do you get your guests? Or how
where
do
to
you pick?
start? Yeah, I mean, do you start with, I'm doing this project and I want to incorporate guests into it? I'm doing
Mhm,
this project and I
mhm.
better put a hole in case there's going to be guests, an empty
Ah, good
eye.
point. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm doing this project and, I'm going to be centered around guests, but I don't got guests, so how do we schedule for guests? How do we come up with the guest list? What's appropriate? I mean, is there too big a guest? Is there too little of a guest? I guess I'm ghosting again. Why don't the people that are listening uh, do my job for me and come up with some idea, our job for us, and give us
Right.
some
Make that work.
direction, because there's a lot of room to go here, and I feel like maybe we're just bobbing in the water, and I'm just looking at which direction sounds like a good place to go. Either way, we're going to address a lot of
Well,
places.
it's gonna completely depend on what your goals and objectives, right, of that show, that live stream, that podcast are gonna be as to where, figuring out what guest you want. And then so, for me, it's always been bringing together the industry and community. So that gives me a lot of leadway, right? Industry being, the outdoor industry, and then, community being the, outdoor community. So that can be anything from an advocate to an organization that, is not the industry, to somebody that maybe they're just a lifelong firearm owner, or maybe they're not even um, a firearm owner. Maybe we bring in somebody that, is not indifferent to the Second Amendment or not indifferent to firearms, for a different perspective. Sometimes that happens too. Sometimes we bring in people that are, their expertise is not in firearms; it's some kind of other thing. But firearm owners are people just like everybody else, and what they have to talk about, is valuable to uh, that firearm owner, audience or whatever that's out there. So you know that the way that you structure things definitely gives you the starting point for, okay, where do I, who do I bring in, right? Who are my guests going to be? Am I even going to have any guests? And who are they going to be, right? Um, from there, it's a matter of reaching out, you know, and just to quickly hit on that. We can go further if we need to. Making events is one of the absolute best ways at securing guest spots, not cold calls, not cold emails, that sort of thing, an actual face to face, and you actually have a conversation with that person. And one of the reasons for that is especially when you're talking about strictly an audio format, right? Even though you do have the capability of video, and quite often I will have the camera on my podcast, as will the guest when we're recording live, and of course in the subsequent replay. Um, you got to be thinking about that audio side of things, or at least I do, the podcast world. And there are some people that they just do not do well with a conversation, and I've had a lot of first time people on as guests that have never done a podcast or anything like that before, and some of them do wonderful because they're great, and I knew that beforehand, right? I met them in a booth at a trade show or whatever the case may be, and I knew they were okay with conversation. They knew how to carry on a conversation, and so it's like, okay, we can we can get on, we can go live, we can record a podcast, and we can make this happen because this person, uh, is comfortable in their own skin. They know what they do. They know who they are and what they do. That's one of the biggest things when I'm seeking a guest. I'm like, look, all you really got to know is who you are and what you do, because I'm here to promote, to you know, help get that out into the world. And so you've got those type of people, and then you got the ones that, for whatever reason, either it's not their thing or they're just extremely uncomfortable with it or whatever, give those real quick yes no answers. and it's like pulling teeth to get more than a couple of sentences at a time out of them. They're not great at telling stories. And then for the audio, for the podcast experience, that can be really difficult. And we're all going to get people in and have those types of episodes and things. It's going to happen. So just be prepared for that, and be able to talk a lot and vamp and everything else during the show, because they're not going to take up that. They're not going to take up that. They're not going to meet, I guess, their quota of what they should probably be talking during that amount of time.
Lots of stuff there. Didn't take enough notes, so I just kind of took a few there. But as far as the interview itself goes, and this is asking somebody like how they make their coffee or something that you're going to do more than once a day, and you're going to do it every single day, probably, unless something comes up. But you're asking somebody about something that they're going to do on a regular basis, and they're not going to be completely uniform in it. But in general, when you come up with an interview now, however many years you're into it, and I'm asking Clover this now, but I could be asking anybody the same way. When you come up with an interview, now that you're this many years into your project, do you have a format for your interview? Question mark. And then, Clover's going to answer that. So the other part of that question is, how different is that process or that answer going to be than when you first started your project? Right? And then to blow everybody's mind, where are you going? You just experience things and the future is somebody else's job? Or are you doing things in such a way that you're helping your own future out, but really have some place that you're going, that you're actually doing projects with intent, and your interviews are part of that, right? So to not blow you away too much there, your interview tactics, your interview technique, asking Clover however many years you're into your project in 2023, maybe the real question is, how different is it from when you started your project? Maybe that's what I'll ask. Instead of asking the details of your process, because I believe it's in flux, at least I'm assuming the answer is that it's changed a bit. How much has it changed since you started, and where do you think it'll keep changing? And then maybe that riff will give us some other stuff to chat about, give us some direction here from our
I think it's
overwhelming amount of
changed.
topics.
It's more changed with the flow of conversation, I think, and time management probably, than it has anything else. It's changed as far as what I would consider the quality of guest. You have those certain podcasts that you do, and you get off that podcast and you're like, wow, that was awesome, you know, and not just in a sense. I mean, you would think that almost every one, right? You would end it and go, oh, that was awesome. And, you know, that's just being realistic. That's not the case, but, more and more seem to be awesome. You get off and you're like, man, that was just a great conversation, you know? And then the feedback you hear, on it too and everything. So for me, I mean, my methods don't change too much, right? Like it changes in the sense that I just get better and more comfortable at doing it. Now it has changed production wise, from the sense of, having some type of an intro, having some type of an outro. That makes things easier to chop and everything when I need to, to take it from the YouTube live over into the audio podcast world. So that's got two different things. Number one, I mean, it's a little more polished because it's got the intro and outro, and then you have it gives you a definitive start and end point, and buffer as well as a start and end point, because a lot of people don't realize this, but there are times when live streams will end and the first little bit of the replay or the last little bit of the replay, and it may just be seconds, right? We're not talking about minutes that you can get lost, but there's seconds at least that can get lost. So if you click live and you go live and you don't have that little bit of intro, and which we don't on this. We didn't start this one that way, but if you don't have that little bit of intro going on, it's potentially you can lose, a few seconds, and then it's weird, right? Um, just polish stuff like that. I mean, moving into this season, um, there will be an added segment, I should say, toward the end of the podcast. That hopefully will be a little bit of fun. I'm not going to give anything away because we might kick that off tomorrow with the company, but first podcast of the early 23 season. But um, yeah, that's even though we're going to add that little segment kind of toward the end of the podcast. That's not really anything new. That's just something that was kind of taken from a previous series that I did, and I'm going to port it over into this one temporarily, at least this season, and and see how it goes. So um, I would say there's definitely been an evolution, right? Um, but I don't know that there's been very much intentional about that evolution. If you recall, I don't know how far back over on the Clover Tech channel folks remember, but I did get a channel strike at one time that shut down my live streaming for 90 days. And so at the time I was doing like 4 lives a night. And those were getting, all 4 lives were getting ported into the audio podcast world. And um so I had to bob and weave and shift and pivot. And so, at one time, instead of doing live, I did out of necessity, I had to shift into a pre-recorded mode, which I absolutely did not like. And that's one reason when I had the opportunity and I was able to manipulate things and figure it out, and especially with StreamYard, like StreamYard here, really makes the management of the chat, the management of the stream, it just makes the whole experience way better than what the whole Google Hangouts that we used to use um, ever thought about being. I mean, we've got so many tools at our disposal and everything else with StreamYard here. Um, I guess that could be considered a change for sure that has happened over the years, but most of it was just a gradual evolution, I guess, is a phrase I can use.
Well, that's the short answer is that it is, right? Whatever it is you start out on any journey, on any project or whatever, you're going to find that you evolve, you get better, you get worse, something happens, something gets easier, something's harder, whatever, it changes. So I think that's the best, your end thing is to summarizes it for pretty much everybody, I think. I guess I was almost going to drop a link because I'm talking and typing. I almost dropped a link to the room that we're in, the StreamYard that you were just talking about, or instead of the video, which I'm trying to do 2 things at once. So I just made it a poll over on the YouTube, and then I posted an Instagram about that poll. So the poll question right now on the big channel, the big YouTube channel, is on my big YouTube channel, gun websites, I guess I should say, for the people that are listening all over the place right now. We're simulcasting on 3 different channels, and who knows where you're listening to this in the future. But right now we have a poll going on the big Gun Websites YouTube channel. What part of guests and interviews do you have the most interest in? I guess I could have even qualified that with this morning. So finding and scheduling the guests, or recording an interview and the how-to, or how guests fit into your goals and your project and the big picture. I didn't have enough room for all that. Or, come on, man, interview the thing already for the people that are just going to waste everybody's time. I always, if I can, put 3 actual posts in there and then one for everybody that's wasting everybody's time so that they can just entertain themselves and we don't have to pay attention to their votes. So is this about finding and scheduling guests? It can be pretty strategic and be pretty opportunistic and pretty like a hunt, right? There's a lot to that. Recording and interviewing, you can gather and get opportunities and ruin them. Completely ruin them. You can impress people who wouldn't be on your show by how awesome your show was, right? Like the technical part of it is a pretty big deal. And it's pretty simple, pretty inexpensive, and it just takes a bit of effort, honestly. Just kind of an awareness almost. Then it becomes effortless, and you don't even hardly even talk about it once you got it down. Uh, then you got, and I shouldn't say that. You can become effortless, and you can get it to that place if you choose to be that way. But you can also, there's constantly interesting things happen with tech, as far as microphones and everything else that you could keep up with or have a lot of fun with. Probably make some money if you talked about how to podcast. I didn't even think about that. And then like how do guests fit into your real your direction for your channel, and in the big picture your strategies. So right now we have one vote for recording, one vote for how guests fit into the big picture. We'll let y'all keep voting, and if you're listening in the future, feel free to leave a comment or something, wherever, either Clover's channels or one of my channels, and we might be able to talk about your points or your questions or concerns in a future video. All right, so you were talking about StreamYard and how cool it is, and then you talked about kind of to answer my question, how it had evolved since you started. What about the other side? Where do you think it's going now that you're at where you're at and you understand you have expanding abilities and influence and ambitions,
Yeah.
and the industry isn't sitting still? Where are you going with interviews? I'm asking you specifically, but this is hopefully illustrates for people.
Yeah. So I don't
It's
get
a moving picture, moving target, right?
I don't necessarily get the question.
Okay, so if you think about where you
Where
started
am I
and where
going?
interviews fit in, both with tech and with your strategy,
Mhm.
and now where you are with them, I mean, it's not like you're an interview show, but you're certainly comfortable with it. You've incorporated them, you haven't shied away from them, but you're also not an interview show. You do other things. So I guess
Right.
there's not much to it, but is there somewhere that you might be going with it? Is there directions that you could see or potentially see yourself going, or there's anything that you're definitely not going to do that you've seen directions that you decided you're not going to take based on your experience? I don't know. Maybe it's a bad question. I'm just kind of
Well, it
trying.
could end up, it could end up a lot of different ways. I mean, it could end up. I'll tell you that there's been so the last season, the late 22 season, and that's part of why I've leaned more heavily into this season and the scheduling and the sponsor advertising and all of the various aspects, production and all the various aspects of it. His last season was the best, like hands down, bar none. You know, um, as far as the analytics show, right? As far as like response. So even through like the pandemic, which podcasts and YouTube views, all that stuff was way high because we kind of had a captive audience. I mean, even better than that. So I'm like, oh wow, okay, this is something, right? And then I get into um, the scheduling aspect of it, right? And you start reaching out to those that you have talked to about coming on, and I filled like 22 spots in a week, and I never expected that. I expected the podcast season to start, and I still had empty spots that I was going to have to work to fill because that's kind of what I'm used to doing. Um, and that wasn't the case. We'll start tomorrow with literally all 22 spots full. Now, guests can cancel for whatever reason, or God forbid, something could happen here. It could be as simple as losing power or something, right? And have to skip one or cancel or whatever. But yeah, that was real crazy. So um, it it's hard to say where it's going to end up because I talk a lot about how especially with the industry side, but not really with the industry side. It happens too on the organizational side and stuff. Whenever I bring somebody in, because we have a conversation, I get to learn a little bit more about them. They get to learn a little bit more about me. The audience obviously gets to learn a little bit more about both of us, mostly them. Um, and by doing that, we realize what we might can work on later on down the road. That may be reviewing product if we're talking about an industry uh, thing. That may be some type of promotional collaboration effort, maybe even a coaching opportunity when it comes to an organization, or to a advocate or something like that. Maybe an introduction is in order, like they need so and so for their to a project, and I happen to know a company, or I know somebody in the industry, right? That I think would be a good fit and would be willing to help with that. Um, so it definitely lends itself, simply by having those conversations, um, strengthening, I guess, a relationship from just like an acquaintance to, yeah, I had an hour long conversation with that person, right? An hour long detailed conversation. And typically, spoiler alert for those that don't know, typically you have a little bit of talk before a chat and a whole lot of talk after the stream goes off air. And that usually is where a lot of the opportunity and the networking and the magic and stuff like that starts, as things that it's not interesting to everybody out there enough to talk about that kind of stuff live. Um, and it's a little bit counterproductive to the overall goal of exposure to that person or that project or that organization or that company. To start talking about the mutual people we know or certain little projects they have and kind of behind the scenes. And with that, there's also some sensitive information, right, that doesn't need to get out there. But um, yeah, a lot of times the podcast, for me anyway, the podcast is often a jumping off point uh, for really good future relationships. I don't want to say business relationships, but definitely, what is the word? Mutually beneficial relationships with um, the guest, whatever mold they might fit into.
All right, I'm trying to make notes as you're going along here without interrupting you or whatever. So I probably appreciate the people who listen to our shows or my shows where I don't script anything and I don't sit down and think, how can I make the best presentation of this, or how do I make the best lucrative, like interesting. Does this keep? Do you still hear me when I go through this part to do that? Did that glitch at all? The audio? Just wondering. I was deleting something. I had to type in a password. Um, some
I heard a little bell
glitch.
twinkle thing, but yeah,
Okay.
it didn't glitch.
Thanks for letting me do that. Anyway, so I appreciate the people let us kind of just riff and then take the show where it's going to go. We're not sitting here. We didn't come up with a schedule for this year, and here's what we need to say, and here's how we're going to say it, and this is how it's going to get disseminated. Instead, both of us know that we both are capable and enjoy the improvisational just conversations and the results of that. So appreciate the people that are willing to follow through or listen, on the other side of this. So I've been trying to not interrupt Clover as he's going through some stuff to make some points here. Let's see. So, okay, thanks for the feedback on that system sound too. So I'm going to try to go back and hit some of these. I don't think there's any way. Again, if we probably tried to plan this, then Clover could say something, we could record it, we could dissect the parts that he just talked about, and then apply like a follow up to those.
Well,
But
let
go
me
ahead.
throw out something, and just if nothing else, bullet point, and that way people are thinking about this, because it seems like we always give the shotgun approach to anything when we do these. A lot of times we don't dissect. We can certainly dissect on a individual level. If people reach out or whatever with their specific projects and goals and whatever. I actually had a similar conversation with Tony Simon yesterday about some things along those lines.
Was it
But
about getting me the username and password for his website so I could start
yeah,
working on that already?
well, I'm glad you mentioned that. No, I need to get on him
I
with that.
keep bugging
Anyway,
him. He's eventually going to be like, leave me alone. But then he's
yeah,
going to make his
right.
website.
He's gonna throw it at you. Probably when he's waiting till he gets to Phoenix so he can literally ball it up and
Oh, I need it
throw it
before
at
then.
you.
But yeah, I hear you.
But anyway,
Um,
he well, it's not about him, but what I was gonna say is pay attention to your scheduling. when you're talking about your guests. Two things I would say about that. Number one is try to make the scheduling and facilitation as easy as possible. That's gonna give you the ability to pull in more guests for obvious reasons. And then number two is on the back end
I
and
feel like you're
tracking and
subtly saying not to do your show at midnight Eastern and then expect people to show up in the middle of the night and listen
it
and be
depends
part of
on
your
if
show.
that's your thing though. You're not doing necessarily a guest show and you're trying to pull in guests at that hour.
I'm
So
interrupting you. Go ahead. Sorry. But
you've
yeah,
got a different
scheduling is super important. And
you've got a
if you
different
say it's
thing.
at
Yeah.
6 o'clock, period, you're eliminating a lot of guests essentially.
Yeah, I leave the time. I mean, I record obviously on certain days, but then I leave the time. That's the caveat or whatever the concession I make to the guests is like, hey, you can pick whatever time that day. I do not care. Because mainly the audio podcast world is where it's really going to be as far as the exposure. Anyway, so yeah, easy on the scheduling and the facilitation as far as the guest. And StreamYard makes the facilitation super easy. I've had very few people that have had trouble, and the ones that have, I don't understand. They usually click the wrong link or something, right? They're trying to figure out how to get in from the YouTube
Oh,
side
I
or
know
something weird.
exactly where the trouble comes from.
Yeah.
When you're on a phone and you open up StreamYard, it'll say blah blah blah, microphone and whatever, microphone and camera, and then you go in there, and it's super unintuitive because you got a left and a right click X thing and check mark,
That's true. Yeah.
and it's so wrong. Everybody that's done it a few times goes, oh, and then they don't realize that they figured it out. But it's
Yeah.
super difficult to navigate that
Yeah.
initial
With the mobile.
meld
But
with the
once you get
phone
in
and
it,
whatever.
but
But anyway,
once
yeah.
you get in, it works pretty well with mobile
Oh yeah,
too.
it
So
works awesome. It's just a
yeah.
matter of actually allowing it to talk to your microphone. And
Yeah.
then there's some glitch about people that insist on using robot ears, where they shove robot probes into their head, and I mean the
Oh yeah.
earbuds in, and then they
You're right.
can't get their earbuds to work.
The AirPods, yeah. That's why
Um,
I use a wired headset, and that's part of why. But anyway, um, the noise cancellation tech on it is much better too. But anyway, I digress on that. The second thing is and it is keeping track of your scheduling. Um, so you need to be mindful of that and be keeping track.
you mean during
Um,
the show or in getting
no.
ready
I'm
for
talking
the thing?
about when you're planning out your episodes and all of that, right? You have
So you're
certain
18
days.
weeks away from that interview, and
You
you're
don't
like,
want
"Oh,
to
I got all the
double
time in the world," and then it's 8 days away, and you still got all the time in the world, and then it's 8 minutes away, and then you're like, "Wait a minute."
something like that. But I was talking more than the lines of you booked, guest A, and then now guest F, you have double booked with guest A, and then you figure that out at some point, and you're like, oh crap, now you got to go back, right? And so, devise a method, right, by which you schedule out your guests and stick to that method, whatever that method is. Don't deviate from that. Stick to that method. Um, because and be prepared for a double booking. It's going to happen. I know Jeff from Gear Report is out there, and I didn't have a double booking, but he was gracious enough to give up his spot this season, or switch his spot, I should say, with somebody because the dates filled up so quickly that his episode was the only day that particular guest had available, and he was like, "Yeah, no problem. I'm fluid." So thanks to Jeff for that, but.
What
But
I
I
do
also,
is
but
I
I
make
also double booked. I did double book one this season, and I had to go back and go. I apologize, but I double booked you. I've got these other dates free. And it wasn't a big deal, thankfully. They could make it. They could make it work. But
well,
and
Grandpa.
every season I do that. But anyway,
Well, Grandpa, I make each guest spot an NFT, and that way the blockchain makes it so I can't double book. So
there
use
you go.
technology, Grandpa.
Right.
All right. So, like I said, there's lots and lots of stuff you kind of chatted about in this last chunk, and there's lots of ways. Again, there's lots of different things. So, I tried to make the poll kind of give us at least some direction on what today the people that are listening live are most interested in. So, again, on the finding and scheduling guest sides, the strategy and the techniques of how to hunt and how to gather uh, guests and whatnot. Then there's the guest, the interview itself, the recording the interview, how to the technical side of it, and the strategies and techniques there. And then I don't want to forget about there's a lot of what do you, I always think of it as we're sitting back in the old days, the internet was this lake, and people would go to the lake and they'd swim around or surf or whatever they were going to do. And then they'd come home from the lake and they used AOL or they used something to go to the lake and then they'd come home from the lake. And then it turned into, you got the internet with you all the time. It's more like we set up shop on the side of a river and the internet goes past us. The same amount of water. It's just you're only with that water for a moment and you're only really looking across the river anymore. You're not you're not thinking about the depth and breadth or whatever the words are for a lake. You're thinking of the stream and the flow. And that becomes a very temporal, I don't know what the word is for that, but very temporary situation. And I don't like that part of the internet at all compared to the lake. The lake is a lot of fun and it shows you just how big the world is and where you are in the world. And that lake it's water, it's fluid, so it's not constantly the same, but it shows you how much there is and you understand that you're in a big part. The river can be really deceptive and there's a lot of stuff flowing through there, but it's impossible to remember it all. So they keep you kind of dumbed down when you're just paying attention to what happens at the moment. So I like to think about these interviews that we're doing, not just as the interview and not just getting ready for and then making the most out of that interview, but thinking about what did you just lay down? You just had an hour plus conversation perhaps with a person. You may or may not have gotten into some really interesting details or some going, maybe, even breach some things that they may or may not want to address. There's some negative aspects. There's some potential risks. There's some potential at pitfalls, right? What's another word for that? Things to worry about with an interview or having guests on. And it's not all roses. And sometimes you got to be aware of the negative stuff that can happen as you're thinking about how big a thing we're actually creating. We're creating an about us page on the internet for that company, person, project, whatever it is you're talking to, at whatever point it is in their career, in their project, in their lifespan, right? And then that's all talking about, recording it. I don't like to forget about that aspect, that we're recording something for perpetuity. We're recording something that are going to be those black and white images that people use as examples of what life was like in the 1920s. In the future, when the internet is all holograms and it's super fast and super big, they're going to be looking at today's internet like black and white photos, and what we're creating exists. It's not going to be forgotten. So you may be creating an interview that turns out to be the pivotal interview for blah blah blah, that people are using as the only remaining footage of the Titanic or whatever. So you don't even know what you're laying down. And we so often think about the now, we're not thinking about the then or the future or whatever that would be called. And none, I want to get it too big, but that's an element of it. Then you've got the fitting the guests into your goals and your project and where you're going and how you're getting there. And that was the third option in the poll today is, how guests fit into how guest interviews and how collaborations fit into your project. Are you doing them because you can? Are you doing them because you want to? Or are these a step in a larger path that you're going to be traveling? I'm going to stop for a second, give Clover a chance to riff on that, and I'll kind of flash up on the screen some of the people that are joining us this morning. We're 45 minutes in, but it seems like people have just started joining us. So I don't know if people are joining late or whatever. I don't know what kind of time frame Clover's got, but we're kind of just getting started with kind of approaching the subject. It's like a lot of things when we start to nerd out, it can get pretty big, but keeping it in these realms. Right now, the most votes coming in are for recording the technical side of it. And I mean, we could both go nuts on how much of this, but I'll let Clover kind of take it. I've been going off in different directions here. I didn't really ask a question, just giving you the mic back.
Yeah, I mean, what I got out of, kind of what you were saying was you never know how, that interview, what that interview will do, what that person will do for yourself or for the guest, right? I've had, it's weird because some of the best conversations that I've had are from the least likely people and from some of the most blah. I don't want to say boring necessarily or anything because we're going to take out the people that can't have a conversation.
You can just say 9mm shooters and everybody knows.
Right. Right. We'll take the people that can't carry a conversation and we'll take that, put that on a shelf all by itself. But, yeah, I mean, I've had bigger I've had bigger gun tubers on the podcast before, and some little company somewhere that makes some little doodad product or something that I've brought in was a much more interesting, engaged as far as the live chat, um, enjoyed by those who commented much more so, right? Um, of a conversation, much more enjoyed conversation, much more enlightening or whatever conversation. And it's like, that's crazy that you bring somebody in that hypothetically hundreds of thousands or millions of subscribers on YouTube and just recording live on YouTube, you know, um, and it makes no difference. You know what I mean? I mean they and that this is why it's important that everybody values their voice and what they have to say and their knowledge base and everything else, and why it's so important to be able to carry on a conversation.
So,
Um,
like, even the person with the most skill in a sport can't just go to show up, knock on the door at the state state championship and say, "Hey, I'm somebody who you don't know, but I'm really good. Let me just win the competition." Instead, you need to go to those practice matches at your school, the competitions between your school, and then you go to other schools
yeah,
and win a series of challenges in arenas that exist for that level so that you can learn and get experience to move on and then eventually become a shining thing in your area.
maybe I'm just saying that whether we're talking about, because again I take in on my podcast the industry and the community. So whether we're talking about a huge well-known company, right, versus a startup company, or whether we're talking about a huge as far as subscribers and being well known gun tuber versus a newer channel. You um, it's the status of how well known they are, how much of a following they have. Um, that's what's amazing to me is that's not a determining factor at all, right? In what type of conversation you're going to have and how that conversation is received by the audience, how well the audience likes said conversation, and how said audience becomes and remains engaged in said conversation. And more often than not, it is the little guys that are more interesting. And maybe the reason for that, now that I'm saying this out loud and I'm walking through it, maybe the reason for that is there is um, oh man, people don't know what they don't know. There is a factor of unknown. There's still a lot of factors of unknown with the smaller creators, the smaller organizations, the smaller advocates, the smaller companies, that sort of thing, right?
They haven't been
Rather
there,
than the
done
big one.
that already.
Well, just that people in general are not as aware that they existed, right? And so there's an elusiveness to it or something, maybe. There's something to be said. Whereas if you have like a popular company, let's take the company example, right? If you pull in, um, and I haven't, but let's just use Smith and Wesson. Let's say you pull in a Smith and Wesson versus let's say Trailblazer Firearms, right? One big huge company, been around forever. The name anyway. The other small company, very small company, very few product SKUs, right? And the the smaller, lesser known, I guess because maybe there's more to talk about. There's more that people learn and more that people go aha with them rather than the big companies, right? They're like, okay, well, I already knew this about the big company, right? Or I've already heard this about the big company, or whatever the case may be. Um, and then maybe it's something to do when you're talking about the industry side of things about how you can be so far removed that at some point it's almost like you're out of touch. It's a lot different when you bring in one of 5 employees or whatever with that company, right? It's a small company versus you bring in one of thousands of employees with a company, right? Like the stories that you get, right? The information that they're able to talk about and they know and they understand. And it's not that it's not that you couldn't get that with a larger company. If you could get the right person with a larger company, right, onto your podcast, then potentially you could have that situation manifest itself. But because the smaller company, they're closer to the products, they're closer to the day-to-day business, they're closer to all of the aspects of that business that goes on, right? There's more to talk about, there's more stories, there's more intrigue there with the audience. They're able to answer questions a lot better, a lot faster, a lot more concise than somebody that is just, say, the PR person for a major. They may not know the nuances of every model. They may not know the intricacies of the
The
machine work and how
history of
things
the
are done.
process
Yeah,
or the history of the
exactly.
company.
Yeah,
That's, I think,
yeah.
the difference, though. When you interview the boss or the wife of something or whatever
Or the inventor
versus
or whatever.
an
Yeah,
yeah, versus the employee who may have been there for a while but doesn't feel comfortable, doesn't feel it's their role to speak for the whole company.
right.
So I think that that's one of the things I meant. I starred. I can just unstart it now, but that's I think a chunk of it, maybe not all of it, because there are definitely companies that take ownership or employees that take ownership and owners that don't know what's going on. But I think that can be part of it. Jeff is saying the newer folks are living through the more interesting and exciting part of their existence, part of their company's lifespan. The bigger, more established are less likely to be in the middle of an adventure that they are surviving. And even if they are, they're more used to it. They're experienced, right? They're the old hands. So an old hand going through a storm can yawn, right? They know that it's the exciting, important, you know, critical part of their time on the ocean or whatever it's like on a boat. But if they've been through it enough times, they're not going to necessarily freak out every time it happens either. They get pretty good at it. So I think that's part of it, right? You can have somebody going through 6 different challenges. It's just that they're at a point in their career where they don't need to bring that up in an interview with you. And that doesn't mean anything other than they've just, just like parents, the first time they have a kid, you're hearing about everything the kid does. Everybody knows about everything the kid did. By the third kid, they're like, how many kids do you have? Like, you don't even talk about your kids anymore. Okay, so consistency, question mark? What the hell could I mean by that at 8:08 this morning? Um, when we're talking about having an interview, and we're still not really focused in on if we're scheduling the interview, if we're having the interview, or if we're talking about something bigger picture, consistency. Do you want your interviews to be something that you can present, like riding shotgun with Charlie? He's got some real consistency with his projects, with his interviews, in that he does it in a vehicle. Now, is there consistency on where they drive? No, that would be really difficult if he, or at least it would be a different aspect to it. I can think of Mike Ritland, whose Mike Drop podcast. He's a dog handler from the Navy. He's okay though, and he has a podcast where people need to show up in Texas. I think he lives outside of Dallas, like an hour outside of Dallas, and people need to show up at his place. He feeds them, and they see the dogs and stuff. He rehabilitates in homes, but that's an experience. So the people that have been to his show have that common thing, and that's something that it's an achievement to be on that show. I'm not sure what it's like for some of the large podcasts that I don't watch, but there's probably something else there, like achievement being on it or whatever. So anyway, some of that comes from consistency, right? Having the time of the show be consistent, the location be consistent. Charlie's brings elements of consistency to his random or his opportunistic approach to going on the road and doing his show when he's on the road, instead of he could be doing his show when people come to his town. He catches them and takes them on a trip or a drive. How different of a show would that be if he waited until people showed up in his town and they had time for him, and then he took them on a very similar road trip, so that the road trip was effectively a merry-go-round. It was taken out of the thing. If he was in his backyard, in other words, doing the same route, we'd never hear about the vehicle part of the conversation. That we'd never hear about, oh, we're driving past where I grew up. It's always going to be, that would be taken out of the equation. So consistency, I'm taking that a couple of different ways. Consistency on, I'm going to do my show at 6 p.m. I'm doing my show at midnight. I'm doing my show at midnight. If people want to show up and be on my show, they either got to be a night owl or take that extra effort. And that, I don't know, does that impress night owls or do they not care? You know what I mean? Like, they're going to have to take an extra effort to be on my show. If your show is in the morning at 9 a.m., it's no different. It's like massive ask for people to show up at the beginning of their day and change their whole day around.
Yeah,
right?
this one definitely is. But this is also, one of the reasons that I think we decided to keep this where it was at was that it was somewhat of a commitment to be here. And
I don't know about all that. It's a good place to put a show where it's not stepping on anybody, and to me, it's interesting compared to doing one in the middle of the night. But I hear you. So consistency. I'll shut up and say, how do you want to take consistency? I was trying to kind of talk myself back into where I was in my headset or mindset, but I think I wrote that with a question mark because there's so many different ways that consistency can play into a interview portion of a project, a greater project of content creation. And then the show itself. Do you have a like I try to do my show with two
all
questions.
I will say,
Go ahead.
Yeah, all I'll say about the consistency, and it's a real simple thing. Television episodes, and nowadays everything's Netflix and streaming. I get it, but I'm going to say television episodes because you know what I mean. Their episodes come out in a series, in a season, for a reason, right?
Yeah, but we know what that reason is.
Yeah, I mean, like that's all been figured out a long time ago. So that's consistency, right? If you have something that is, it changes up. It's the times that you do it are random. And, you never know when something's dropping. You never, you know, um, in the old days with television, that was more because it wasn't on demand, right? And people had to get the TV guide, and eventually they learned, oh, this show is on Thursday nights at 9 o'clock. They got that, and so they were used to it and they're accustomed to it. But even nowadays with on demand, if you're talking about the people, and obviously there's folks out there live right now at whatever time it is here, 10 o'clock in the morning, that are listening and engaged and and care about the conversation. If people know what time typically you're going to record that live, right? Or you're going to drop that podcast. Let's say you do it pre-recorded, right? There's a certain amount of people that are going to be out there. They are going to be waiting on it. They are going to be ready to go because it's something for such a long time since the invent of television, basically, definitely television networks, that has been a thing.
I'm just going to go backwards at the
even before that, radio, I should say. I was putting it in terms of television, but heck, even radio back in the day.
And then if you go backwards from that, like you're doing, you get newspapers come out on Friday or come out in the morning.
True. Yeah, valid. Yeah.
So all of that had to, and then why did those deadlines happen? Why, or whatever that's called when newspapers come out? And then why did the shows come out? I guess that's what I was going to say. I'm going to like rewind it or at least pull out the focus to that. And that was all about the 9-to-5 jobs that most people had and the expanding, workforce and blah, blah, blah. The end of, the technology of television comes from radar in World War II and the industrial kind of the getting into the groove of the industrial age and then the baby boom. That was a heck of a lot of uniformity. I guess that's the way to say it, right? There was a lot of uniformity going on. It was cool to be like your neighbors back then. And so that Thursday show that you were talking about is because the way that our society worked, Friday was your day off, Thursday was you're getting ready for, it just worked that Thursday was the day everybody was going to, for the most part, people were going to sit down and watch TV and absorb whatever the programming was going to absorb to them, and whatever advertising, cigarettes or laundry detergent was advertised during that show is going to make the most money. And then you start to make this chart of, Saturdays at this time, there's this much money involved, and Mondays at this time. and all of that gets down to, you said there's some that kind of stuff. I think that's gone with the demand and the binge season of binge watching. I hear what you're saying with the season and the episodes, and that's important. It's necessary so that you can grow. Because otherwise, if you never have seasons with your channel or your project, if your project is just a meandering thing, you're going to grow like a moss or like a grass or something, right? You're just going to grow in all directions all the time. And sometimes that'll be useful, but other times it's just going to look like a big mess, right? Most of the time it's just going to look like a big mess. So if you want to take a perspective on your project and think, okay, I want to grow in that direction for a while, and then I want to go up, or I want to go sideways, or I want to do something, there's that element to it, right? So you're going to, shut up. So then we got way too much to talk about, and we're an hour in. I don't know, consistency. It's a lot to go off of just one word there. Unless you want to throw something in, I'm just going to keep going.
Roll with it.
Jeff said earlier, I think I had more of a set format when I started. I much more go with the flow now. And I definitely know that's a tendency. And I go back and forth on that. I went to a set format of why do you do what you do and how do you do what you do, for two reasons. And one is because I want to give people that opportunity. And I'm curious, I'm super curious on those two questions for most of the people I interview. But it also gives me a format. And I am thinking, even though I'm fairly flexible and I don't have too much constraint on my projects, I do think about what I'm laying down for the big picture. And I don't care if my stuff is a half an hour late or if I miss 2 weeks, because when you're 1,500 episodes in, you have a different perspective on a project, right? I don't need every show to be awesome. I'm satisfied if I get 8 awesome shows out of a season or whatever, right? So going with the flow is a tendency. I believe it's a tendency to fight, though, the urge to just go. You can go with the flow and it's comfortable, but it's just like sitting on the couch and whatever. It can be okay, but then people want to come sit on your couch, right? It can get pretty sloppy. It can get pretty whatever, informal. Is that the right word? And you can kind of require people to kind of deal with a lot.
Yeah, it's the.
If they show up to hear about the company and you chat about their dogs and the parking lot the whole time, they're like, well, I guess it's interesting to know about their parking lot and their dogs, but was really interested in the new holster design.
Yeah, I think they're, and this gets more and more difficult. The more people you're going to have on a panel, right? The more you entertain interaction from the live chat. I love again. I will not discount the value of the live chat. That's why I record my podcast live. But even some of the folks out there today, you guys realize you throw some weird stuff out there in the side chat sometimes. And so, especially when, I'm doing a podcast and it's about that guest and everything else. And there are side chats I don't even bring up, and I don't do it because I don't like the person that asked it or said that or whatever. It's just like, it wasn't really conducive to the conversation. It was going to throw a kink in it or a curve in it. And, I didn't want to go down that road. So you got that element that can kind of throw things off kilter, and that happens even more so if you're going with the flow. The other bad thing kind of related to that with going with the flow is you've got to realize there's a delay between what we're talking about and what the chat says. So you get into this weird cycle sometimes. Somebody will say something in a side chat, we'll entertain it, right? It'll kick us down the rabbit hole for 30 seconds or a minute. Then we'll get back on track. And then there's 16 more comments having to do with the rabbit hole that end up dragging us back down the rabbit hole again once we've gotten back on track. So it's one of them things to where it's more a management type thing. And the management is a lot easier to do and easier to handle when you just have one person on on the panel. Yeah, again, it's kind of like I talked about earlier. It's an evolution that you'll learn. Once you have guests on and you start doing things, you're able to walk them through and kind of direct it.
It's like if you
the
give
whole
your friend
idea. you talk about palate cleansers all the time, G. And so that's one thing that I actually enjoy if it's woven into the conversation somehow, right? Like, and that's the part of it being a fluid and organic conversation is you create the potential for a conversation about their dog because or maybe there is something interesting about their parking lot, right? Now, if you just jumped off and all of a sudden you were talking about the holster, right? And yeah, it's outside the waistband and made of this leather, and we get the leather from this. And oh, by the way, we had our parking lot refinished last week or something like. Well, that's out of the blue, right? But if there's something that leads into talking about the parking lot or leads into talking about the dog, that's the art of conversation. It's much more fluid, and in that when it's put and framed in that type of a context of a story that leads from something that is kind of built up to that or maybe it was said off the cuff and I go back and I'm like, well, wait a minute. You said something about you said something about your prototype holster, the first prototype holster you made, and the dog ate it. Like, but what? you know? And then that gets into, oh yeah, I prototyped that holster and it was sitting there and, I've got a, German Shepherd, blah, 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 and, likes to chew on everything. And I left the door, that would be one of those situations where it could be a funny, interesting story, right? And open up the door maybe to talk a little bit about the puppy. Obviously, you don't want to spend 15 minutes talking about the puppy, but there may be other interesting stories related to the product or the business that revolve around that.
Yeah, and there definitely isn't right or wrong. There's just thinking about it or letting it happen, I guess. Anyway, there's a couple of things there. I made some notes so I don't interrupt it or didn't interrupt you there, but there there's no right or wrong, right? So if you're the only company, I think I put this a star on it. If you're the only company that talks to them about their dog or that thing in the parking lot or whatever, then you're a friend of theirs. Like you're the alternative to the people that only care about what have you done for me lately? Dance. It's time to dance. Give me your elevator speech and move along, buddy. You know what I mean? Like that can kill a company. I'm pretty sure that's what kills companies, right? Not only,
Yeah.
but that's the
Yeah.
kind of stuff where if you can't even get a break, like the people in your own industry
Well,
or your own community aren't even on your side, and it's just like, nope, wrong grip angle. Next,
yeah.
go ahead.
Well, that's a hard and fast interview, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, Barbara Walters on 60 Minutes, right? Or the segments that Once Upon a Time with John Stossel, or for just an example of things like that, right? Those are hard and fast. Like, they have their questions, they have their topics, their own thing, and it's like, oh, what about this? What about that? What and they don't allow themselves just to sit down and talk, right? And so I wanted, um, and there's many, many, many podcasts out there that do this. I wanted some semblance of structure, like one topic sort of flows and leads into the next type situation. I definitely want to talk about the person. I want to talk about the products. I want to talk about their projects. I want to talk about the organization or the company. I want all those things in there. Um, but I want some sort of flow, right? And so, whether you look at Joe Rogan, some of that's obviously the biggest podcast out there. You know, they have a
Well,
lot of weird
biggest three and a
conversations
half
and
hour
they go,
podcast, and they can go 3.5 hours of
well, this is true.
weirdness and then
Yeah.
pull the cool parts out, and now there's those parts where
But
people
they
remember.
go, if you listen to the whole thing, though, is what I'm getting at. And a lot of people just hit the clips. I get it. But if you listen to the whole thing, um, it's a progression. There is a flow there. Like it gets onto some weird stuff, sure, but it gets onto weird stuff in a way that progresses naturally. It's not just off the cuff, like oh, we're talking about the book you wrote about you
Yeah,
know
according to my notes, now we're
U.S.
going to talk
geog
about how
U.S.
you feel about
geography.
this.
Yeah, and now we're gonna go. Oh, what do you think about space aliens? It's like, huh? You know, um,
But
and,
that's
and
again
yeah,
a 3.5 hour conversation that they can handpick, whatever that's called, the handpick, I think, the stuff
whittle
that
it
they
down. Yeah,
want
yeah.
versus, we got 20 minutes, you got to give an elevator speech so people know who you are. And now let's talk about whatever the topic of the day is. Let's go, go, go.
Yeah, but let's
Let's
be
go.
honest. I mean, I go an hour. That's kind of my goal. I usually tell folks that we've got an hour. I want to keep it. I want the brevity to be there. I want to keep it as short as possible. That way, people that are time sensitive, and there's a lot of people that way as far as attentions and other things. It's not really too much. Seems like a huge mountain for them to climb to listen or whatever. But at the same time, I want enough time to be able to cover the elevator speech things, the things you're talking about. Who are you? What do you do? Right? And sometimes that may take 30 minutes. Sometimes it may take even 45 minutes, right? But that gives us 15 minutes, not necessarily in one chunk, but at least interspersed throughout the conversation. That if we want to go off on a tangent, if something comes up that is a cool story about whatever, and they want to go off on that little tangent for a little while, we can actually entertain that, right? And that's a human element. I mean, how often are we talking? I do that. I get all over the place quick. And maybe the way I run my podcast is a reflection of me. Go figure, right? But there are times when we're talking and then all of a sudden we pause that story, right? It's almost like a flashback scene in a movie where, where we pause that to back up to something else. And then we come back to where we're at. Like, oh, yeah, to give you some context about this, let me tell you about a story about, happened to me and blah, 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 and then you jump right back to, going back into talking about whatever the product was or the company or whatever you were talking about, right? But it's one thing sparks something in your mind, and that's always cool because it takes you down some interesting weird paths. And you're right, G, that being able to allow for them to just roll with things like that, right? Um, it creates a much more comfortable setting. And it creates a level especially when you're talking about a company, it creates a level of intimacy or personal relationship or whatever like that, right? You start seeing a company as made up of people at that point, and it's not a big faceless. People think of big companies, and all too often they think of a CEO lighting his cigars with $100 bills, pounding on a board table, firing people and increase the profits, and one guy's like running the whole show and the whole company, the persona or the spirit of that whole company is ultimately that one billionaire goober, and it's like that's not necessarily the case even for some larger companies. There's great people that work there that love the company, that have great stories about the company and the product and other things, and they're real people. And I think being able to showcase that, and it's the same way, when I bring in, gun tubers, YouTubers, when I bring in activists, that's a big thing too. Like you've got people, take Tony Simon, take, um, Diana Muller, take, whoever it might be, right? Activist, staunch 2A activist. I mean, pillars of, uh, what's going on in the fight for 2A.
Like
And
Brooke
then
Cheney. You don't got Brooke Cheney
Brooke,
on as
Brooke
a guest,
Cheney,
though.
she'll be on this season, yeah. And,
Yep.
bringing those people in, right? And so a lot of people see those and they're talking about real regular folks. They've heard of these, but they put, we often put things, not just people, but things on pedestals, right? And like at the end of the day, we're talking about people here. Like there's not a whole lot of difference except for the circumstances in their life. The choices they made are just different than what you made. Other than that, we enjoy the same things. We have very similar stories to tell each other about whatever the topic might be. We have a lot in common. Is what I'm saying. And I
Right.
really want to try to help bring a lot of that out.
Okay. There's a lot of going on there. I'm gonna jump in with one. I did make notes here, so I didn't interrupt you, but you were saying it. But there was, I don't know if we should keep jumping into this one while it's still hot. The last point was, no, I'll go to this one. So know that person that you're going to be interviewing. Are they going to need help? Are they going to need to be held back? Are they going to need to fit it inside of an hour because they'll talk all day? Or do you need to help them fill 5 minutes, right? And in that same element there, are you helping them, or is your goal to help them? Are you going to just focus? Are you just going to help them shine a light on their weakness, or are you coaching them, right? Are you uh, are you there as an expert to promote their project or their product or them, or are you there to help them understand the software, or not the software, but the system that you're on, the platform or the just environment that we're in? Are you holding their hand and helping them? Are you a friend they can contact with a phone call or a text message, and you're going to also talk live? Or are you an obligation that they're uncomfortable with and have to accomplish so that they can quickly forget about it and move on, right? Do they come to your podcast and grow and learn and feel like they've found a new ally? Or, are you forgotten like every other adversary or thing that they had to overcome? With that in mind, most people are asking about, or when we did the poll here today, what part of guests and interviews do you have the most interest in? Since we're talking to the people that are here today, only 12% are talking about finding and scheduling. So we're really not going to focus on strategic, how to find guests or how to get the guest on the show. And only similar, only 12% are talking about how guest interviews fit into your overall goals, which is short-sighted, but whatever. We're going to go with what people want, which is recording an interview and how to. So a big chunk of that preparation is, right? Preparation is what it's all about. So that leads into my second part of that, right? If you've got somebody who, are they going to need to be held back? Are they going to talk for hours? Are they going to go off in different tangents or whatever and just go off? Which might be interesting, but is it helping their company? Is it helping them? Is that the image they want? Maybe your goal is to help them rein it in, show that you can just talk about a topic or two. Use StreamYard like I'm doing over here to make notes, star those notes, like use technology to assist them, to show them how to have a better interview, right? Or is it somebody that can't fill 5 minutes, right? Either way, you are setting yourself up for that, right? Plan for your own success, plan for their success, learn from your interviews, learn from people like us that are attempting to make this all better by lifting everybody up, right? So you can look back at your own stuff. If you were in the sports, you'd look at what you did. If you were shooting, right? If you were shooting, do you look at your target, or do you go shooting, place a target, a clean target downrange, shoot, and then walk away and come back next week and shoot and then walk away and come back? Or do you go downrange, look at your target, maybe even keep that target, maybe even date it, and then look at your progress over time, and then every once in a while set those targets down next to each other to evaluate your progression or your evolution? Why don't you do that with your content? So when you're planning for your own success, are you going to talk to the person at the company who needs to be held back, or the person that can't fill 5 minutes? And why would you want to bring both of those people on the same show together? Maybe you can be, again, the friend to their company, the ally who brings those people on separately and lets the one person ramble about the origins and lets the other person talk about the details. You're then bringing an audience of people who care about the details, who get the details, and a bunch of people who care about the origin story who get that. And you've given them twice as much reach that's focused on the people that are interested, instead of trying to force square pegs in round holes and making tiny pegs or tiny things to fit in. I'll shut up, but that's a couple of points that I wanted to not interrupt you with there that are kind of on your last point there. Go ahead.
The first thing about that is I think there's on a certain level, you've got to be kind of what I like to call a student of humanity. So, I like to have, it's a risk anytime I bring somebody new on the podcast. Now, if it's somebody I've had on before, you can bet your biscuits that they know how to carry on a conversation and they tell good stories, and I have zero problem. I know that going in, right? But when we talk about bringing somebody in new, it is better for me. I enjoy it more, and I think the audience enjoys it more because I enjoy it more. Um, Knowing as little as possible. I don't, and the risk with that is, you've had a very short meeting with that person, and a lot of times they'll want to tell me their life story and everything, and I'm like, if it's okay with you, let's save it for the podcast. Like, I know who you are, I know the company and your products for the most part, but if it's okay with you, let's save that. And like when we kick the podcast off, I definitely want to get into all that for sure. Because I want that genuine reaction, and me being able to react genuinely prompts questions, right? If I'm bringing on somebody for the second, third, fourth time, right? We're going to go down rabbit holes. We're going to talk about things that some people out there in the audience that maybe never seen the other two, interviews that I've had with that person or whatever, two podcasts. I don't like to call mine interviews. They're conversations, but, um, if they haven't seen them, it's almost like an inside joke type thing, right? And so some people may not get it. But if I go into that on the same level as not only the live audience, but those listening in replay, right? And is there more potential for me to be thinking of questions, following up on things that are said that potentially that audience hearing it for the first time, right, is thinking? And the way that I see it, the answer to that is yes, and that's why I like it. Now, the risk is you get into those situations where, yeah, you've got somebody that's like, so I hear the new product come out, the XYZ. Tell us about it. You know, oh well, the specs are this and blah 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 blah. Like literally 15 seconds and they're done. And you're like, oh my god. Okay, well, is it any problems with the manufacturing and hurdles you had to overcome? No, everything went well. It's like, oh my God, like tell stories, right? And so, usually in pre-chat, whenever I have guests come in, that's one of the conversations. I'm like, look, I know you're probably nervous because it's the first time or whatever. I get it, but this is just a conversation. All we're just two people talking, right? Um, just relax. Like, I will steer the conversation, and I'll watch the time, and I'll watch the chat, and I'll be doing all of those things. Um, and if there's certain stories, if there's little side quests, things that are interesting, that you find interesting or found interesting about your journey, with products or whatever it might be, um, please, by all means, go off on those tangents, tell those stories, right? Um, and I think that that's helped by saying that, because so many people, especially when you're talking companies, but it works the same way with advocates and pretty much anybody. They hear a podcast, and for whatever reason, and I guess it's because there's so many quote unquote interviews that go on, right? Be that, nightly news, or, whatever it might be, the morning show, or the whatever, the late shows, whatever it might be, right? Um, that they're just used to, it's question after question after question, and that's how the thing goes. And it's like, no, no, no. This is a conversation. We want to definitely go through, again, I go back to, if you have any type of life experience at all, right? And you know who you are and what you do, you're going to have no problem, right, coming into my podcast and sitting down and having a conversation. You're just not.
Right. So friends versus clients versus at interviews or versus interviews. So again, I'm trying to focus my even though I typed these things before the poll is getting more and more answers, and it's still staying uh, predominantly interested in recording and the how to. So, I mean, obviously there's the microphones and stuff. We'll do just a whole nother show. We're an hour and a half in. We're not going to get into the technical aspects of it. Well, we could get into a technical thing about the software, the platforms, and the devices that we use, and then the platforms that we distribute it on, and the audio and visual ways that we distribute it. But as far as the how to and the theory and the strategy and the implementation and your project of it, um, uh, recording the interviews, having conversations with friends, how does that help their company? Is that fit in? Is that something strategically? Is that something that they need? because they are missing that? Is that something that they're lacking? Is that the right word? Or is it something that's just unnecessary? Is it something that's a stress reliever for them? Is it something that's an experience for them? They're going to have fun with your channel of this size so that when they're on, they have a plan to do something with a project that's going to be much larger or much more consequential potentially, because it's going to have a lot more money involved, let's say, and they want to feel comfortable there. So your project is their training grounds, again, their practice range, the place where they learned, and then the place where they come back when they're comfortable. A place like most ranges where coaches and let me just keep saying coaches because I can't think of that other word. But when you go to the range, you're not necessarily being technically coached by someone, but there's probably someone with some expertise and some general interest in seeing the people who go to the range get better, there to offer advice and counsel. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of, a counsel. So, you're going to find people that you can ask advice of at the range. There's no exchange in value there. They're just offering their advice, right? But are you that for the people that you're interviewing, or are you their arena? Are you their playing ground? They're are they putting the spotlight on you, or are you playing in the afternoons? I don't know how to say that with sports. So, are you having conversations with the people that you're having on? And is that your goal? Is that part of it? Is that intentional? Or is it like, I think Jeff brought up, is that just, kind of, let's see how the interview goes? You can say, hey, let's meet and have a conversation, and let's have it be about XYZ, or let's have a conversation and let's see how it goes, right? You can kind of set that up when you're creating the thing. There's nothing stopping you from saying, hey, let's talk about 3 things and then see how it goes. Let's see how it goes and wrap up the interview with 3 questions I ask everybody, right? There's some strategies there. I don't think there's a correct answer. But that was my introduction to this question, or what I was thinking about when I wrote this one. Where do you have to riff on friends versus clients versus interviews versus conversations? Maybe I should have put it that way.
Yeah, I think it depends on how well said guest. Um, it depends on your overall goals, and it's going to depend on, well, I guess it ties into how well you know the guest, but how many times they've
Well,
been on, right?
I think
So
it can be the show too. You can have somebody on who's a friend, and you can be like, "Hey, this show, I'm interviewing you, and then next week I'm going to have you on, or join us on Friday, and we're going to shoot the shit." But
right,
you can have somebody who's like, "Hey, we've never chatted before, but this show we shoot the shit, so we're going to shoot the shit," and anyway.
yeah,
So it can be the
um,
format too. It doesn't have to always be like just that's my style. It can just be like, "Hey, for this show."
yeah, and that's why I always build mine is I mean they're conversations, right? And that conversation can be leaning toward the interview. That conversation can be leaning towards just friends having a chat, right? I can lean it multiple ways if I characterize it as a conversation, and I don't pigeonhole it into, okay, this is an interview, right? Um, and then so you can custom tailor it. You can always, like I said, it there's a lot with what I do in my podcast that I click the live button. It's fluid. I mean, new first time guest. I mean, I've got some bullet points of you know, we definitely need to hit on this, that, and the other because ultimately, um, when it comes to my guest, I want exposure for them. I want promotion for them. I want people to get to know them and their company and their product or their organization or their projects or whatever it might be. That is the ultimate goal. But in doing that, I also want to I don't know what the word would be. I also want to get to know that guest better. I want to have friendly conversation with that guest, and friendly conversations. The more we talk with somebody, right? Um, that's basically how you define a friend, right? It's somebody that you have some things in common with, but you can have great conversation and you can actually stand being in the room together or whatever the case may be, right? And that's sort of how you define friends. So ultimately, anybody that comes in as a guest has the potential to be, to become a friend if they're not already. So it's kind of like I talked about earlier when I said it's sort of an evolution. It's an ever evolving thing that I think can you tailor your podcast one way and you're just hard and fast interview all the time, right? And then maybe you have another podcast or every so many you just do a fun thing or something. Sure. I mean, you could do that. But I try to take elements of all of them, right? And make a stew, so to speak, with it in my podcast. And that's why I use the word conversation. Like with a conversation, you can have anything. I mean, you know, dial a date or whatever, speed dating, right? I mean, that's just a short conversation that you're having with a person, but it's got an overall goal, you know, attached to it as well. And so, same thing when you talk about your elevator speech. If you meet with a company, um, yeah, I don't know where else to go with that.
Yeah, you're kind of answering a thing that I had talked about from, probably half an hour ago at this point, more than that maybe. So Jeff brought up at some point after that. I think it's easier to answer for a specific show, but hard to generalize uh, who you should have on the show depends on your goal, scope, reach, audience. So he's saying, I think that it's easy to answer for a specific show, but
I
harder to
don't.
generalize. I don't know. I guess that was probably in response to
So
something. That's why I'm not sure what he was actually responding to.
so I
But
agree. I agree with the go figure. I'm not going to agree with Jeff 100%. Um, I agree with goals. Um, Scope, I'm not sure, and I agree with audience. I agree with goals because obviously, if you're a firearm related to a related channel, um, if you can't tie in that guest in some way, shape, form, or fashion, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, if you just want to, well, I guess that would be a goal if your goal is like almost like a Piers Morgan, right? To just pick on whoever your guest was. I guess that is a thing, and that could be a goal. Is I'm going to bring people in and try to pick them apart. Um, so I guess it would be, and that's going to dictate how the show goes. Um, the reach in the audience. So the audience, again, I think there has to be a commonality. I brought the beard guy in last season, for example, for one show. I had a non um a firearm owner, but kind of a on the fence 2A guy from California on one time. I think we pretty sure we pre-recorded that one at his request because he wasn't super comfortable with it. Um, and then that was, I don't know how many years ago that was, but maybe a year ago. And then I was thinking of another example too. Oh, this season I've got a channel called The Honest Truth, which is, firearm adjacent in the form of liberty and some other things, but I think it's got some crossover with the audience. So
is
I
that the
do
guy from
agree.
California? That's somebody else.
Somebody else. Oh, the guy from California is the one I was talking about. But no, 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 no. The honest truth is not. Anyway, so the reach thing, right, is like I don't understand, and I'm saying Jeff and I don't disagree completely. Maybe we do because I don't understand what's meant by reach. It says you should have uh, who you should have on the show should depend on your, and there's commas there, so let's just put reach in that. Should depend on your reach. Um, I don't think there's anything wrong if you've got a million subscriber channel or a million follower, download whatever following on the podcast platform. Um, Look at Joe Rogan. It runs the gamut with the people. He's got people on I've never heard of before. Um, you know, you could be a big channel and have, small fries on there, right? The same way that you could be a small channel and have the opportunity to talk with a big, huge company or whatever. So I don't understand that. The other ones, I would say, goals, scope, audience. Yeah, I would kind of agree with that, um, tentatively anyway, in my own little way. That I think that does align when you're a little bit when you're picking your guests or when you're looking at your guests.
When you're scheduling interviews, when you're, I guess since we should be probably focused on the tech side of it or the actual thing. This is more of a strategy, I guess. But
Hmm.
I highlighted it. Do you think of the interviews portion of a project or the conversation portion of a project, the collaboration, because this is also collaboration portion of projects,
True.
goals or opportunities, something you create or something you take advantage of?
It's going to be both, but the primary is going to be for me is going to be goals. So for me, it's about bringing together the industry and community. So in other words, I want to take people from both sides, and I want to make sure we're all aware that we all exist, type thing, right? And who exists and what we're doing. So ultimately, that's my goal. Um, so just by having them on the podcast, by having a great conversation, by getting information out on them, again, who they are, what they do, their projects, etc., um, that pretty much achieves the goals, right? On my end, anyway. Now, there are 100% opportunities that arise out of that, right? I'll bring, you can bring people on, and a lot of those opportunities present themselves in that you realize through said conversation that you've got things in common. They realize through that conversation also, if you're talking about a company, let's say, they realize that, hey, wow, this person is genuinely interested in the success of my company. Like they want to see me, succeed, or put organization in there, right? Or project or whatever it may be. They're generally interested in it. They genuinely, um, did I say generally? Genuinely interested in it, and they genuinely want to see it succeed. So, that leads itself to, a friendship style situation, right? Um, and oftentimes that opens the door for, all kinds of potential opportunities. I mean, they may come back and go, look, had a great time on the podcast. We got a pretty good response from that. We want to, do you have any sponsorship opportunities? Do you have any ad opportunities? Do you have, this, that, and the other? It may lead into, hey, you seemed real interested. Your audience seemed to have a lot of good questions about the product, X, Y, and Z, whatever it is. Would you, you know, what if we get you one of these, that way you can, do a review and get that out, some more detailed information on it out to your audience and stuff. So opportunities can 100% arise from it. That's one of the reasons that, I've got a litany of things at my disposal as a content creator, and highly encourage other people to be the same way, to diversify not only in platform but in the type of content that you're putting out, because one can lead to help and support the other. And the podcast has been a huge thing for me, mainly because it's a free opportunity. Um, Not on the sponsor advertising side, of course, but as far as the guest opportunity to get out, to have the conversation, to get in front of an audience, to talk about you and your projects and everything that you're doing. Um, that's an icebreaker. Like, hey, here it is, and that's the word that I'll write on the white spot on my business card every single time that I hand a business card to somebody. Right in front of them, I pull out the Sharpie and I write podcast across it. Because it's a gateway. It's usually, especially when you're talking about companies here. Um, but I'll say, hey, let's get you on a podcast. Like there's no commitment. There's an hour out of your day one day, to sit and have a conversation about you and your company and the products. Like we're not talking about crazy off the wall stuff, right? Um, we're just getting the word out about your stuff, and we're sitting there and having a conversation, and then you know, um, it's usually received really well. Everybody has a good time and all of that. And again, I mean, you never know uh, what can come out of it. It's something really easy to do because it's marketable, right? You've got a podcast. You established your regular getting guests and getting the episodes out. You have all of those boxes checked. Well, now it's marketable for sponsors and advertisers, right? And then so they're getting passive exposure, I guess you could call it, while the guest, right, is getting exposure for free. So it's a win-win-win-win situation in a lot of ways.
All right, so we're 2 hours in, so I'm getting through them here. So we got goals versus opportunities. I think that was the last one. Um, that flips it around. Flip it around the other way. I'll talk about that here in a second. Then we've got the production value. I'm not going to get into that one. We'll do a different one. Give us some feedback. I know that the feedback today has already been on the production
Audio,
stuff.
audio, and audio with that is what I'll say. I mean, you want to make sure that your
Yeah,
guest
that's
is
good if you want to be in a studio and you want to have the kind of thing. But if you want to be the guy who's showing up at a rally and interviewing people like a guy called Dude Bro did, that was changing the
well,
environment.
there's a lot of man on the street, and there's a lot of people that do that. And again, they've got decent microphones, and they're editing and other things. You can actually hear what's going on. So that's kind of what I'm getting at. I'm not necessarily talking about a studio setting. I'm talking about you want to make sure that whatever is being said is being heard, and you got to realize we're talking
Yeah.
about podcast here for the most part. Audio
Yeah. So
generation.
same thing if we were talking about video. There's we know people that'll go, oh, I'm going to do that as soon as I get a camera. So people
Yeah.
will be like, oh, as soon as I get that podcast recording rig, I'm going to do that. I think you can do that and then go, yeah, it would have been nice to have better video, but I was there. And now the next time you go, you decide if you recorded it bad, because a lot of times you can record things once and go, oh, I can record that better, and then find out you don't need the equipment.
Yeah, and
So
sometimes
anyway,
things just happen. You have
yeah,
malfunctions or
it's
stuff.
a debate that, like I say, we'll have a whole show about that if people are interested, because that is a whole different thing. And we've been kind of, like you said, shotgunning it. I think of it as 30,000-foot view instead of zooming in on the technical side of it. Interview styles, same kind of thing. There's nothing right or wrong, and there's not a track that you're on like a railroad. But if you are going to be a dune buggy, then you got to expect that people ain't going to be able to keep up with the whole race. If you put it in a racetrack and put bleachers up, they're still only going to see portions of it. And honestly, what happens when you have a racetrack with bleachers? People start to show up for the wrecks. So if you do the long distance race where no one can possibly observe anything but the finish line and the start, then you better be a good storyteller. Like, there's got to be some play there. So that interview styles, there's no right or wrong. Just realize that you can do any of them well or poorly, right? And that can be
That's a good one.
wing it, or it can be planned out. But just because you plan it out, don't make it better. And just because you wing it, don't make it horrible, and vice versa. So,
Well, then chemistry with the guest makes a big
yes,
difference, and you can't
yeah.
plan for that.
And you can say, you've experienced this enough. You can say, how many people are there? I'm talking to you. We hit it off. Are you the podcast guy? Are we going to chat? Like, oh, you're sending in like Claudia. Oh, has Claudia ever been on a podcast before? Like, maybe she wants to jump in on one of our Gizzard shows that Gizzard hosts, and he invites people in, and she can cut her teeth, her chicken beak, so to speak, in a live conversation with people. Or maybe something like that. You can set yourself up for that, or you can be hit in the face with that stuff. But you got to be hit in the face once in a while. Don't get scared to be hit in the face. But you know what I'm saying. You don't have to go walking in the doors either. But anyway, interview styles, we kind of talked about that. Building up the whole interview, pre, during, and post follow-up. So I think I kind of mentioned that. When you go shooting, do you buy the gun and put it in the closet? I'm a good shot because I bought it. Do you buy the gun and a bunch of ammo and go to the range and shoot it and go, I'm a pretty good shot? Or do you go down range and see those targets, figure out what the heck, shoot until you can't shoot wrong, then go out 6 months later and see if it's a perishable thing and you've lost it, then go back 2 years later and see yeah, it is perishable, but I understand the fundamentals, so I'm able to bring it back in and do that often enough that you feel comfortable, right? Because that's pretty much what I think I just described what most of us do with our firearms. And it doesn't matter if it's a shotgun or a revolver or anything. So why wouldn't we be doing that with our content? And why wouldn't we be doing that with our projects? Unless you're truly just doing it as a hobby. I don't think people that are doing this as a hobby are listening 2 hours to something that we're this nerdy into it. You know, you've got your strategy, then you've got your pre, you know, how do you approach people? You know, what do you approach them with? You've got the during, and there's a lot to the during. And then you got the follow up. You know, do you just drop stuff? Do you just take your shots and then walk away from the range, or do you go down range and gather those targets? I keep bringing this up, but what do you think? Anything to add to that one?
No, yeah, I mean, you're spot on. I mean, you got um, there's just a lot of things. I mean, you're talking more on the guest side, but I would say the podcast as a whole. You know, you've got the pre-planning, you've got the pre-promotion, you've got the post push to various platforms. You've got other things to consider even outside of that.
That's true. That's true too. And we're acting like, since we're talking, I guess we called it guests, interviews, and collaborations. For some reason, we're thinking podcast because we're on a podcast on a video thing. But you know, this could be a series of uh, blogs, joint blogs or collaborative blogs that lead up to questions or polls, and then you've already structured your live conversation a month ahead of time, you know, through polls and stuff. Now, you know, okay, we're getting together in a month. Here's a poll. What do you want to hear about? You know, hey, the poll is telling us that they want to hear about this. So what do you guys think? Or hey, ladies, this is what people want to hear about. You know, so I know we were kind of thinking this and you want to promote that, but this is what people want to hear about. How can we, right? You've got that potential when you're setting yourself up for this stuff. Just to reiterate, you know, what are you creating with that? What's the long lasting result? Are you creating long tail stuff, or are you trying to compete with the other people who are splashing around in the river? You know, most people, I think at this point, I don't know if this is too off topic, but I think most people are sitting at the side of a river, and the internet to them is a river. They sit and come to the river when they feel like it. They turn on their phone when they feel like it, and they just watch the stuff go by, which tends to mean the things that are the
Yeah.
noisiest, loudest, and interestingest, right, are going to be looked at as people take that moment or two with the internet. Every once in a while, somebody says, I'm going fishing, and they're not going to the river and throwing in a line and seeing what comes by, but they're going to that lake internet, the big old internet that's still sitting there. And if that's when they find your stuff, they were fishing for you, they were looking for you, and they found you. They're taking you home to eat you or whatever they're going to do to you, put you on the wall, right? Um, so they're looking for you and they found you. So you're, you know, what are you creating that content for? What are you building it for those people that are fishing for you? Or are you
Man.
building it to try to catch the people's attention for a brief moment while they're pooping on or in a train or something? Well, maybe they're pooping on a train. I have no idea what they're doing.
Yeah. And
Or sleeping with them.
when you look at the archival potential, right? One thing that has been sad but very cool at the same time was I've had guests over the years that are no longer with us, right? And it's it's interesting that you've got somebody that's they're no longer on this planet, right? And yet you can go listen to them have a conversation, maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago, whatever, right? But there's something about that. I mean, they they live forever on the internet, which is kind of cool. And sometimes I even get their family that finds it. They didn't even know they did an interview, or had a conversation, or we're on a podcast. And every now and then I'll get a comment like, "Oh, I didn't know, so and so had been on your show. It was awesome to listen to this and get to hear their voice again." Blah blah blah.
It's a great point. Both sides of that applies. Um, Next one is from Jeff. You ever wonder how much of the after chats might make good additional content?
Very
That
little.
can, huh?
That's it. That's it. Usually the ones I'm involved in, very little, because
Oh,
they either would not exist very long on a platform because of the nature of the conversations, or it's way too much inside information.
I don't know about all that, but if you talk about every after chat, they're definitely not any of that. They're just boring, sitting around BSing most of the time. Or say, I've been in too many after chats where everybody just says the same thing they just fucking said for like 2 hours. They just say it again at each other, and I have been in too many of those.
Yeah,
Anyhow,
mine lately are not that way. Mine are usually gossip sessions, and a lot of like behind the scenes talking about things that can't really talk about publicly for whatever reason, whether we're talking new
yeah, there's
products or
no. I mean, everybody's everybody, but
issues with
you worry
companies
about
or
the
whatever.
micro. You're not seeing the big picture. You worry about the big picture. You're missing the details. So there's always that, and there is something about that. But he's talking about, I think, just the jokes and the fucking running around and that kind of thing. Um. So anyway, I was just gonna say, yeah, you can definitely. You can stop broadcasting, but you can still do things to create stuff for that. Um, I don't know. I think that the as far as presenting something from off air, I think that would look staged or weird or creepy because you're like taking security cam picture of people or something, right? But even what Clover's talking about, the stuff that isn't for air, or that's just conversation, there's that part of it is massive, and that's why I wanted to bring this one as a start comment, even though I don't think the content
Yeah.
itself is going to be all that interesting, so it's going to seem fake or something. But that is where there's a lot of power, and there's a lot of
Uh-huh.
you can schedule yourself for success or not, and if you tell the person we start at 5. Please show up at 5, and it'll end at 6. It'll take about an hour of your time. That's a lot different than saying, if you'd like to show up a half an hour early or do a pre-show for an hour so that you get used to the equipment and we get everything, and you don't look like you don't tell them this, but you don't say, so that you don't look like you never used a computer before. Let's get together and make sure everything works. So on our end, we know like we can connect to your computer good. Then you have that half an hour conversation. You get to figure out not just the technical side, but how they pace themselves. We pace ourselves differently because we're on here all the time, and I do not mind interrupting people at all because that's just the way that the internet is. It allows us to do that. Some people think it's like a CB radio over, wait for Clover to say something, and now I start talking again. Like that gets very weird, and it's not the way we talk in real life. So some people are going to flip to that mode, and getting them comfortable or past that is useful sometimes. But then the uh, off air, though, while it's not for bottling, it's where you get your experience. It's where you start to figure out, well, I'm just using what Clover just said. These are the people that are going to sit around and talk about XYZ after the show. And then these are the people that are going to hang up right after the show. These are the people that are going to listen after, there's a lot of stuff to be gained. So you can, again, set yourself up for success. Hey, you want to chat a half an hour before? Let's get everything ready. Let's chat for an hour off air before, get everything kind of situated. And then let's plan for an hour on air and an hour off air. That's come away from that with somebody who planned on sitting there talking to you for 2 hours. And now if you go a little extra, well, you're eating out of your own time, but you're eating out of time that you ask them for. And you're not like, hey, let's talk for an hour. I sure hope I can have an off air chat with them. Well, you've got to express that to the other person. So I guess that was what I was going to say is the off air stuff is crucial in a lot of ways, at least in my experience. It's super beneficial. You're not helping yourself at all if you don't schedule in some off air time. And I'll just end because Clover, I'll take this for a second as I hand it off to him here. Are you coaching people? Are you helping them with figuring out the internet? Some people think it's a CB radio. Like, I am here to talk about whatever, over. Okay, I'm responding to your response, over. Thank you for talking, click. I'm turning it off now, right? And it's not. It's a phone. So, hey, okay, we're off air. Let's keep chatting.
Exactly.
Letting
Yeah.
people know that, hey, you know what, you can go online and you can chat with people and you can be in contact with people in your industry. If you want to use the excuse of let's get together and have a podcast with 5 of my friends, and now you're adding that to your channel lineup or your product lineup. We also do a podcast, but reality check, you're really bringing in a bunch of your friends in the industry and you chat for an hour and publicly, and then you chat for 3 hours off air. How many people meet up at a restaurant or at a place, meet up at a sports, and then after the sports, they sit around for 3 hours at the restaurant, and that's where so much work gets done. This is the electric version of that, right? So your guests, your
Right.
interviews are a factor, of a fulcrum or a catalyst for that. And that's the part where it might not be for air, but it's for your experience and your awareness. I don't want to say
Right.
crucial, but it's super benefit. Very valuable, right? I'll
Yeah.
shut up and let you riff on that.
No, I mentioned that earlier when I was like, once you go off air, if it's a new company or whatever, once you go off air, there's very often, and I will always tell them going into it. I'm like, hey, you know, um, here's the way it goes. I'll hit the button, I'll go live, I'll bring you in. We discuss the flow, and I always talk about the end, always, always. And I go, now, when we wind things down and run the intro, like, don't go anywhere. I'll come back and I'll give you the all clear that we're not live. And then, we can have private conversation at that point or whatever, right? Um, always tell them that. Now, there are some guests that as soon as we say bye or whatever, they do click off. It doesn't register with them. They don't remember or whatever, right? That does happen. Um, but more often than not, they do hang around, and I come back and I'm okay. We're off air now. Hey, that was a good conversation. Thanks for and many times that they'll say, oh man, especially if they were first time, they're like, oh man, that was fun. And often they'll talk about what all it takes to do a podcast, because man, maybe we should start a podcast, or whatever the case may be. It can lead into, oh, I couldn't tell you this live, but this new product, or you know whatever, right? It's some of the after chat conversation, you're right, um, is very productive, and oftentimes that's where the opportunities, we talked about the opportunities, that's where the opportunities uh, present themselves.
Okay. Next is a question that I was told is very powerful. And this was something I came up with while you were chatting. I didn't want to interrupt you. So it's from a while ago. Does it have a timestamp? It's from 8:33. So that means it's like a long time ago, an hour and a half ago. What would you look for in an interview of you? So if you're sitting there contemplating having people on as a guest to interview them as part of your project, to collaborate with them, what would you look for? And obviously, everybody's tastes are going to be different, everybody's expectations are different, but that's a place to start. I've got a little terrorist who I'm pretty sure needs to go POTTY, so I'm going to let Clover riff on this and I'll be back in a minute.
Well, that's interesting, because I kind of turned it back around uh, on the host or whatever. But I don't know. I mean, I would think. Uh, see, what would you look for in an interview? So as a host interviewing myself or talking with myself, um, I'd definitely be looking for the ability to carry on a fluid conversation. I would be looking for, from the outside looking in, I guess from a viewer standpoint, looking at me, I would be looking at probably the storytelling aspect, like, you know, how well can I talk about, my projects, my journeys, or is there any detail involved, things of that nature, I think. Um, I don't know. It's go with Jeff out here from Gearport, he says, I think it is a neat way to put yourself in the shoes of your guest in order to lead a more productive interview. Yeah. Um, like if I owned their business or I did their project, right? Uh, what would I want to talk about, right? Because odds are that may be what they want to talk about, and sometimes that could lead into something totally different because, especially if you don't know that guest, then you could be thinking totally different. I mean, you just see the surface, right? The company, the organization, the whatever it might be, and you don't know all of the nuances, and so you're thinking something totally different from the way that the conversation goes, and it can really throw you for a loop, and I mean that in a good way. Um, so I think that, um, but I think it's important just to be able to. G-Webs is right to have a fluidity of conversation, and pauses are okay, right? It's those awkward pauses that are bad. Um, when I don't even know how to explain it. When you get a situation to where you're expecting that guest, I guess the bump on a pickle guest, right? The ones that are very matter of fact and very quick with their answers. And when you ask a question. So, for me, I'm not that way. I'm gonna ramble and ramble and ramble and ramble, as I've done now, waiting on G-Webs to get back. And so I'm gonna have to have somebody to cut me off and go, okay, we're off of that. Now we're on to something else. A lot of times that's the case. If not, your hour-long podcast with me is going to end up being an hour and a half. And I talked about that earlier. So I guess one of the things for a host too, I'd be looking for with me is the correct way to what is the word to steer the conversation and get out as quickly as we can, or not as quickly as we can, but on time anyway. Um, just because of me being able to bloviate and ramble and talk forever about absolutely nothing, right? Let's see. Jeff says, I doubt Manny actually read the tips and notes that I send, but I send it because it can really help them if they take the time to think about it before the show. Um, yeah, I mean that's true. I'm not 100% sure if you send those out, and it's much more beneficial with something like that, right? Tips and notes and tutorials and lessons and things like that. It's without a doubt more beneficial to have those send those out than it is to not, because at least there's some resources there for people that do want to partake of that. Um, I would be skeptical in how many people actually do. Um, how many people want to do homework, right, of any kind, to then go into a podcast setting, a conversation, an interview. If it's a hard and fast interview, then maybe. I mean, if they know that that's the format, then they, may want the questions beforehand. Maybe depending on their role, their role with a company or organization, their station in life, whatever the case may be, their career. Maybe they have to have, that type of a structure or whatever, and that kind of eliminates them from the storytelling part altogether. They can't really go off on many tangents. But if it's somebody that is literally coming in to talk about who they are and what they do, um, I don't know that they're. I don't know. I'm skeptical that they're willing to do a bunch of homework to come in and do that.
Very well. It's quite obvious. I've had some experience with bribing animals in order to fix the gizzards giveaways in the past, so I know what happened here. Clover bribed this dog to make me go outside so that he could hork a bunch of the show, and now this put it. All he wanted to do is go out there and do nothing and waste a bunch of time. So well played. Stop it. Now he's just running around barking. Um, I'm assuming you had time to address that one. Did you go on to more or just that one?
No, I just did that one, and then Jeff had some. Jeff with Gear Report out there had some elaboration on it. We covered, so we can move on.
So now he's literally just eating their cushion. Good dick. Uh, so the next question was: are you training wheels for the gun industry to learn how to social media? In other
Yeah.
words, what is your value? You value your voice, right? I say that all the time because we are the lobby. We are the gun owners, right? We are. So it's not like there was a time when people thought, I think there was a time when people felt that others did. And our point was to observe and to occasionally agree or disagree with what we observed. It's never really been that way. And although that perception might still be out there, the reality is that all of us are drops in the ocean or drops in the flood or however that thing goes. So
Hmm.
thinking of how you value your place in your role, your ability, your reach, your because your reach isn't just the people who you talk to and who listen to your business or whatever. It's not just the people who will listen to it into the future. Do you think of your reach as the people who aren't born yet that are going to be paying attention to what you put out there, right? We're casually having a lot of fun out here. These are all the black and white pictures that in the future people will go, this is what life was like, back in the olden days. So your reach, are you taking your skill sets and your abilities and using them to show others or to help others find the path or the way or the methods or the
Right.
techniques, right? And
Yeah.
I'm going to whoop on two dogs and go mute for a second, and then Clover can talk about this.
Yeah, I think we absolutely are. It's kind of like I had mentioned earlier. I've had guests on that. We end the broadcast side of things. We go into private chat after chat, and one of the first things is they start asking about man, how did you start this? How did it get facilitated? How do you facilitate it? How do you do this? And I know multiple guests that we've had on, both companies, individuals, whatever, that have started their own podcast. And I'm not they may have been thinking about it beforehand. I can't say, right. It's not like I invented the podcast or anything. Maybe they've thought about it. They've just never I talk about you talk about valuing our voice and everything. And I've said it before that you've got to value your voice, because just by the sheer odds, mathematically, um, your message, the way that you put a message out, the way that you explain things and say things, there's at least one person on this planet that you're the only person that's going to be able to get through to them, right? And the thing is, you may only have a reach of that one person that you've gotten through to, but what kind of reach does that one person end up having, right? Do they end up becoming the president of the United States one day or whatever? And your influence on them you know was strong or whatever. So it's things that you don't even realize, kind of like the I don't know, the butterfly effect, maybe, in a way, that you create that ripple or whatever, and you don't realize where that ends up, and what all it affects. So um, yeah, just by valuing your voice, just by turning on the microphone and the camera, just by doing it, right? You're definitely going to, um, I don't know if influence is the word. I don't know if inspire is the word, but
Have effect,
others to,
have influence in the respect that, like, without your input, they'd have a different path, right? Different trajectory.
right. Like maybe they've had a negative aspect and they're like, oh, I like the way this person does this, right? So now they're like, okay, now, if I do something similar to what this person's doing, right? Um, I like this, right? This is something that I can see myself, see the company or myself or whatever moving forward with. Yeah.
Uh, Anne Marie is saying, I appreciate all the interviews. I learned so much no matter the topic, especially if I decide to start a channel. It doesn't come with a manual. So what about a manual for your channel manual? You ever thought of something like that? But thanks for the comment and
Maybe. I mean,
appreciation.
you get into, when you talk about that, I mean, you get into, so
Just put a
many
date
different.
on it, channel manual 2023, so people don't look at it in 2017 or
For what kind of a channel, right? That's the
Oh, I'm talking a
problem.
gun tuber channel. Yeah. But I
Yeah,
hear you're saying, yeah.
yeah. That's the one problem. And
But
even
that's
if
the
you get
thing. You
into a
could,
gun
if you
tuber, are
tried
you
to
going
write it
2A?
down.
Are you going reviews? Are you going interviews? Are you going lifestyle? Are you going, like
Yeah,
which
well,
direction are you going with it?
you don't have to have a encyclopedia. A manual can be nothing but bullet points. A manual can be a map, right? A map
Yeah,
on
as far
just
as like starting a channel,
so
I guess could be pretty basic. There's
no, I'm
definitely
saying though,
some
but
common
you could have
denominator things.
I'm talking about a manual, I'm saying, but you could make a manual that just has nothing but bullet points. You don't have to elaborate or extrapolate on every point. But if you just started to think about all the elements of, that would be super interesting. And it's like a blueprint, I guess, manual / blueprint. Anyway, I was just saying you could come up with something like that. I think we should all get into printing, having something that is printed is literally as simple as just getting a color printer, which can cost you 26 to 50 bucks at the store, and then some amount of ink if you do it that way, or taking it to like whatever they call Kinko's nowadays, a printing place that has fancy copiers and printers, and you pay a couple of bucks, essentially the same price as you would pay at your house, just a little bit less convenient, a little bit less. Or even an Amazon print on demand. Not even just for the revenue, which it could be, but just to give us more ability and more, I don't know, the more facets to what we're doing out here. And if no other reason, if you're going to do the bullet points for your channel, I don't know, checklist anyway, might as well write it down. Then you can edit it or modify it. Like I was talking about before, are we doing this stuff just to do it? Or are we doing this stuff to get better? Are we monitoring? Do we use analytics? Why not use the same kind of process with our projects? Very rarely, how many people do you know that did one project online and then they walked away, or they're still doing that one project? It's possible, I guess, for someone
Right.
to sit down and hit a gold vein or something and just not do anything different, probably out of fear that they're not going to do it, or out of laziness because they don't think they have to do anything differently. But most people, I think, start with something and then start a second, or start with something, finish it, start another different one, and explore and try different things, either what's comfortable or what they haven't tried yet, right? So I guess I'm saying you can apply this technique or that concept to the next, or another project. You don't have to always be doing this for our projects that we're mainly thinking about, I guess, or maybe whatever. 2 hours in, and my dog said, you can see they go from like, oh, now he's going to cough, but he's gone from sitting here being sleeping most of the show, got up, was becoming I'm going to start calling him a saboteur. Call him a terrorist isn't fair to him. So he's a saboteur. He gets up and just decides, nope, I'm not going to give you a moment's rest until I'm outside. And in this case, it was all ploy to give Cover a chunk of the show. But now he's played with the other dog, gotten her all riled up. She's back to sleep, tore off on the bed a little bit. Now he's going to fall back asleep. So that's the life cycle. It's like having a little Tasmanian devil in a terrarium. You get like this little 7 minutes of chaos, and then he goes back to sleep and all that. Anyway, a little insight into the puppy here. Personally find interviews like reading a book on a topic, but live. Learn so much from them. So I don't think that has a constraint of if it has a structure, or if it's organic, or if it has a goal, or if it's a roundabout, right? At least that's the way I'm reading it.
Yeah.
Trying to do 3 or 4 things, catching up. Worthwhile fun. Saying, not sure whether going podcast route will ever feel like a fit, but I can see where it could be another way to share what I'm doing in the state legislature. So
What I was
I'm going
going
to
to
test this
say,
one for sure. Go ahead.
what I was going to say on that when I seen it pop up was, it may not be a fit. But don't discount that the podcast world exists, and then maybe run those circles as a guest, if nothing else. So you're utilizing that infrastructure, right? That's already there, even though you may decide it's not a fit for you. That's perfectly okay. Uh, but that would be my advice: is you know start reaching out to some podcasts, and as you go on one, other ones will see that, oh wow, so and so had this person on, and maybe that was an interesting conversation, or whatever the case may be. And there is talk. I get talk all the time, like, hey, you had so and so on. You have their contact info. Like, how do I get in touch with them? Um, I get that a lot, and it works the opposite way too. That I'll sometimes ask people, I'm like, whoa, you had so and so on, and like Toby, for example, is one. Gee, you've had Toby on many times, and I'm like, okay, I got to get Toby on.
All you got to do is ask them.
Yep. Well, I'm just saying that that never really necessarily was on my radar until you started having him come in and have him on, right? So.
Oh, I got you.
Yeah.
I was sitting here, like, just going back to me, and I was sad.
Making the podcast circles can lead to more podcasts that you do.
I'm glad you took it in that direction, because I was going to say, you don't even, well, I'm going to take it in two directions. I was going to say something else, but you don't even have to do what Clover's saying. If you've got someone who is doing the circles and you just whisper in their ear, hey, something's going on in Missouri. Hey, we did this with the legislature. There's plenty of people who like to be guests and are guests, and often, I don't want to say often, but occasionally, at times, they are lacking of something to bring to the table, but they're always got an invite to the table. And those people who do have a regular seat at regular conversations are often accessible and able, especially if you live in their state or if you're doing something, you're a champion of something they appreciate. They are the same as having a seat at the table in many ways. And you don't have to be comfortable. You don't have to have an invite. You don't have to be there at that time. If you can get that person on your list, or they watch your show, or they want to take this puppy's free. I've been trying to give him away for months, and he's not letting me even sit here right now. So there's that. You don't even have to be part of it if you want to be part of it. Then I was going to really say, though, before that, go in the podcast route. Do whatever you're going to do, and then grab the audio off of it, and that's a podcast. So I think we should probably do a show on definitions someday. Give us some feedback if we should do a show on definitions, because definitions are not permanent at all, any way, shape, or form. So what a podcast is, I know people who, if I said I was a podcaster, I might as well say I'm a dirty hippie selling garbage art on the streets, right? Like, where I'm using a dirty towel to wipe off people's windshields at the corner. Like, they hate podcasts, and I don't know why, but I know people that loathe podcasts. And podcasts are literally nothing more than an audio file in a podcast, either system or flow or platform, which just means you put an audio file at a certain place on the internet and tell the rest of the internet, hey, we're calling this a podcast. And the internet's like, okay. And now you got this podcast. And if you do it in just the right way, the feeds will pick it up and take it. It's just a cool way to distribute an audio file. It's just that some people sit down and prepare their audio file like an old radio show, because that's what they're accustomed to or emulating. But some people like me will just go nuts and say blah, blah, blah. And one day it's awesome, and the next day it ain't, right? And then I'll just take the audio and shove it up there once a week when I'm listening to Toby from Cape Gunworks. That's usually when I'm listening to that show. I'm doing the robot work of grab the file, take it down from the internet, put it up on a server, give it the little dressing and the little bow that it needs so that the internet grabs it and distributes it all over as a podcast. So a podcast is, I look at it as just an audio file that you put a fancy bow on or the right scripting around.
Yeah.
But in reality, it can be very elaborate. It can be very nothing. So think about whatever it is you're doing. And in Susan's case, it's actual boots on the ground, real work. Documenting that work is so important. I mention this as often as possible. When I grew up, our role models were Annie Oakley and Wyatt Earp from the olden days, dime store novels, exaggerated stuff, except for Annie Oakley. She's awesome. But then, because that's documented real life, Annie Oakley was, important. But you know what I mean? We had like very few role models, and they were iconic, historic role models. Today, people's role models can range from Masada Ayub to ladies like Susan, who are out there doing stuff, real work, who are changing the face of gun ownership and what gun owners are to the representatives at the state level and at the national level. There's girls out there and boys that want to accomplish something with their time on this rock, and they can see as young people that it's possible to be part of the government, the political process, without having to be a politician that they don't want to be, without having to be a lobbyist that they don't want to be, to just be, I'm going to say, regular people who have ambition and ability, and they take advantage, they do that. So the fact that she's documenting that along with the other ladies in the DC project is archiving what needs to be archived. You are literally, we are in a time of flux, and we're seeing the 14th richest guy on the planet fire the chick that successfully did the whole roundup thing with Monsanto. She failed at guns. She acted like she was a grassroots organization, and she got fired. Who didn't get fired? The ladies who are spending their own time and on their own dime and changing the face of gun ownership. So thank you for doing it, but archiving it, you know, podcasting it, blogging it, videoing it is just another way of saying documenting it, archiving it, putting it down for the future. But then you've got so much help, and you've got so much people that can help you with that. Just take a camera with you, turn on a recorder once in a while, and once the documents exist, you can participate at any level you're interested in pushing that through or putting that up on the internet. But I think a podcast is a great low effort way to get introduced to it, or to start that, right? Because you can literally just turn on an audio recorder or a video recorder, which is just as easy. And even if you get not perfect audio, you can get snippets, you can get sound bites, you can get a documented archive of what happened, and maybe before the yelling, you know, the actual entirety of something, where often you're just going to get sound bites. So whatever it is that you're able to record with, or however you're able to record, again, that's valuable. Now, what you do with that can be time consuming and laborious, but it can also be collaborative. And we're talking about guest interviews and collaborations. So being the people, the human beings that actually take the initiative and do, the people that are getting up in the morning and traveling with their own money and getting into wherever it is they have to park, and then walking in. Can you imagine how hard it is to park and then walk into a government building in any state in 2023? And these people do that often to see somebody getting off a bus who's getting paid by that 14th wealthiest person on the planet, right? Who just get off the bus after eating breakfast somewhere and stroll in and fill up the first seats. Those people that are doing that work, there's going to be people that want to help you with that. There's going to be groups of people that are like, hey, I'm looking for something to edit. I'm looking for creative ways to take your footage and make it seem cool and hip and trendy, and put it on the stories or the shorts or whatever. All right, I'll shut up. What do you think? All right, I think you've already said it. Was that Mike?
Well, I fixated on you saying that podcast, whatever, has a bad
No,
name.
you went in the right way. You went in a
My
totally different,
experience,
valuable way.
experience, but I wanted to tell my experience with that, because I've seen just the opposite. Like, I get it, the whole influencer, and I'm using air quotes that nobody can see. Um, I get it. I mean, there's companies, there's people that have dealt with influencers or whatever, creators or podcasters or whatever it might be, right? And got a bad taste in their mouth because lack of professionalism, or, whether something was shady, or promises weren't kept, or obligations wasn't met, whatever the case may be, right? But one thing that I've seen is a podcast has a better chance of being received positively than live stream. And I've had this conversation with many creators that,
Oh yeah.
were kind of spinning their wheels. And I'm like, look, take your live stream, rip the audio, put that dude up on the audio podcast platforms. And now when you approach a company or somebody, you have a podcast. You don't have a live stream. Like, I think live stream, the site that starts with only, and Twitch, and like things like that, I think, um people hear about that type of stuff, all the time, and I think they conflate that with live streams in general, right? And so when you go podcast, what are they thinking of then? They're thinking of Joe Rogan, right? They're thinking of Tim Pool. They're thinking of, you know, whoever. Insert big podcaster here, right? Um, and so the I don't know, it just gives a different look, I mean, in their mind. But I mean, you could be right because there could be podcasts that have burned that particular person or company on an individual basis. So I'm not discounting that at all. That you have to be careful with what terminology you use when you approach certain people because there are certain things that they've just had a bad experience with, and it's gonna affect them negatively.
Okay, the next one is definitely a tangent, 2.5 hours in. So I'm not apologizing. You're the one listening to this 2.5 hours in. Anne Marie asked, I have one off-topic question. Is USCCA insurance worth it? Question mark. I answered it briefly out there, and I said we would address it. I'll give Clover a chance to. We'll just try to address it with one response each, knowing that we could easily talk about this for an entire channel or an entire topic or an entire other conversation. But
Yeah. So a lot of the follow up conversation. There was a lot of people out there in the chat that were definitely answering her question. What I'll say is basically what a lot of them said. USCCA is legit. Whether it's worth it or not, I mean, it's like any insurance, like especially insurance you're not forced to buy. Like you've got to look at what is offered versus the cost versus the risk that you think you're taking by carrying every day, um, and make that decision, right? I think AAA is worth it, for example, but like that's one of them things where if you don't own a car or you drive 2 or 3 blocks a week, with your car or whatever the case may be, or you drive some old beater or whatever. I mean, you may not, or you drive new cars that you lease, right? That has roadside service on them, whatever, right? Like it may not be worth it. So, um, but as far as being legit, yeah, USCCA is totally on the level and legit. Yeah, not a problem there.
all right. So then I did put up a poll also. So I don't call it insurance because it's technically none of them are insurance. Your choice for personal liability protection. And it's often called like personal liability protection for those carrying a firearm. So we've got the prepaid legal. We've got the prepaid legal. We've got the legal defense fund. And then we've got the lawyer on retainer. So there's having an individual lawyer and then telling that lawyer, hey, I want to have you represent me. Here's some amount of money up front. So now you're on retainer. Like I have you on call. And if I'm ever needed, they say, do you want to call your lawyer? Like there is a lawyer to call. So that's one option. One option is doing nothing. The next option is having a lawyer on retainer. Then essentially you're just paying that lawyer to be there to take your call, and then you probably get some kind of discount or some kind of rates or something. But essentially you're giving that lawyer something up front just in case. Then you've got the prepaid legal fund, which is essentially the same thing on a bigger scale. So instead of having to contact an individual lawyer, you've got either a group of I'm just going to say law enforcement, even though they say they're not law enforcement, but people who come from government jobs started one of them. People that come from lawyers started one of them. People that come from police and firearms instructors started one of them. People that were insurance people started one of them. I've done quite a bit of research on this. So each of these things, was started from a different place. So the prepaid legal is essentially the option that most of them choose. And that's to say, you're going to pay us monthly. We're going to put this into a giant pool, which is our business because it's our business. And when needed, when something happens, we come out and here's the set of parameters. And within the set of parameters, we find or we help you find a lawyer who's going to represent you when and if and where the circumstances apply or whatever. And that's the definition. So they are generally, then the last one is a legal defense fund, which is more of similar, but it's more of like there's going to be this pool of money, and when needed, people have access, members have access to it. And what we do is coordinate experts in the realm for you, and this is the fund that pays for all that. So some of them pay you back, some of them are money up front, depending on if they're funds or what they are. Some of them are discounted rates, some of them help you with this and that. And many of them, but not all, have added a layer of, well, it's to your benefit to instruct you, especially if you've never gone beyond zero instruction. There's familiarization with a firearm, there's familiarization with the laws of carrying, and then there's familiarization with the skills and tactics and techniques of carrying. And people have either some or no awareness of any of that. So because they know that people are in this spectrum of awareness and competency, most of them offer some sort of training, and that's either DVDs or pamphlets or downloadable stuff, or sometimes even classes. And that can be appealing to people who either do or don't have access to alternative training opportunities. So, and then you get into other benefits like celebrity endorsements or little flares here and there, like any kind of marketing, and then just the reputation and the branding that's out there. So there's a lot of layers to it, and it's not simple in any way, shape, or form. That's probably the most concise way I've been able to explain it in my efforts yet. Going forward, I hope to spend some more time, since I've spent so much time in the past on it. It'll take less thank me and hate me and love me for posting that data that took about a week to accumulate last year. I've learned a ton. So if I was to redo it just off the top of my head, it would be better. But if I spent another couple of days researching it and verifying some stuff, did the audio break up? Then
it did there for a minute, but you're good now.
Okay, but anyway, so there's a lot to it. It's semi-interesting to me, but here's the biggest takeaway. None of them are perfect. None of them are horrible. Almost all of them pay people $10 a deal to send you over there. So all of them had advocates that get paid $10 every time they send people over there. Just keep that in mind. None of them are snake oil salesmen, but they're almost all giving you $10 or more or less to get people over there. And the people that are interested in the $10 may or may not be interested in all the different nuances and stuff. So there is no such thing as insurance for crime, and being in a firearms incident, you are a criminal. Keep that in mind. Like, there's some massive negatives and positives to this stuff. If you look at it as just insurance, none of them are. If you look at them as having allies on your side in a time of crisis and preparing yourself to avoid that kind of thing, they're all have their pluses and minuses, right? So there's a lot to that. Hopefully that was a little bit of enough of the iceberg to know, like, okay, this takes more than just an entire episode to talk about all that.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's see. So then, and then, like I say, there's more to it. Jeff says, as long as you remember that we are in the interesting business and use that as a guide to your show, then your chances of success are higher.
True. Yeah.
In an interesting business, or I don't know what it means, but I guess
I think
just
that's
in
what
other
he's
words,
getting at.
appreciate what we're doing and that you're part of the industry and that you have value and you're literally part of the stuff that's being stirred around and that is stirring. Yeah. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, I mean, tech's involved, right? Like product development, raw materials, advocacy, then look at all the different things from hunting to shooting sports to whatever. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts and pieces. And so, yeah, maybe that's what he's getting at, is that adds to the interest, right? Like almost everybody touches it in some way.
Gunswater asked the definition of those first two, and I tried to approach it, but prepaid legal is like a prepaid legal fund is when you've got a bunch of people who offer money to a service, and then that service has relationships, probably pre-existing relationships, or at least some established relationships with lawyers all over the place where they might be needed. Versus a legal defense fund. There's only one legal defense fund, the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network. So that's the unique one in the fact that it doesn't try to find lawyers for you. It has expert witnesses and can help you, but their goal is really just to get money in your hands now and then help you get out of jail, or excuse me, out of the, to win in court without having to do a bunch of stuff. So they're a little bit different. So for me, the biggest one was the lawyer on retainer versus the prepaid legal fund. That's essentially the same thing, but just like one's an individual where another one is like a group. So that one was the more, I thought that was the one that's more difficult to figure out, but they're all essentially a pool of money to get resources for you if needed. And like any insurance, not very many people are needing them, thankfully. So, they are able to keep going and exist. They're not bad business model. Anyway, that was probably too long on that one. Your report said you can never have too many projects, right? So I don't know. I mean, I think that, yeah, you can have too many things to juggle at one time. But if you look at it as board games on the shelf, you can only play one board game at a time. And there might be times when some people want to play, I don't know, Connect Four, and other people want to play Battleship, and some people want to play Risk once in a while, right? So having the board games and knowing that, like, next time we play Risk, I'm going to kick your ass, right? Or like, next time everybody comes over, let's play Connect Four, except, with Tabasco shots or something, I don't know, whatever. Like, have, be creative with it. So if you try to play everything at once, it gets pretty weird, right? If you bring everything out and try to have 4 games going at the same time, or try to interchange pieces, it gets kind of weird. But I don't know. What's your opinion on projects and having too many at one time?
I think it's time management and kind of understanding. It's just your understanding of the various projects. I would use an analogy of, like, having too many projects is like having too many power tools or something, right? There's certain things you're only going to use in certain instances, but when that instance arises and you're like, okay, let me knock the dust off this thing. What kind of awesome something can you build with that power tool, right?
Oh, that's way better. Way better analogy. Yeah.
So, they're only going to be worth the time that you put into them, obviously.
And there can be a tool that takes you 7 years to figure it out, and then you kicks out a square that you could have done with a saw or something.
Right. This is true. Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's a great point. And you're also, the game analogy makes it seem like it's frivolous time wasted, perhaps, except for the camaraderie or whatever lessons you'll learn. But in reality, it's tools, and you are going to learn from, or you're going to gain from the camaraderie. You're going to gain from the lessons learned, but you're also going to be potentially kicking out products, or at least getting skilled in operation of processes that can kick out projects. And honestly, I think that's another analogy is great in another way, and that's value your voice. And you don't have to be singing all the damn time. Value your voice, and you ain't the soloist. Value your voice, and you're not just in the choir. Every once in a while, you may need to solo. If there's a soloist and that person gets bored or sells out or falls asleep or is too busy doing something else, and you're able, you might be the soloist, and you might be the next soloist after a situation like that. So, valuing your voice and everything doesn't mean you got to be full balls out constantly. There's people that, I can't think of too many people, there's people that duck out and come back. I think most people burn out on this whole thing and never come back. Or, I don't know, or I guess some people take breaks and come back, but most people either think of it as a cool hobby or an investment in time, and then maybe they do burn out. So maybe that's why I'm saying it. Like, don't go full, just like anything. You don't turn your car on and just haul ass everywhere you're going. If you do, you're wearing out your engine, you're wearing out your brakes, you're getting tickets all the damn time. You might be enjoying it, but at some point you're going to quit enjoying it. You might just drive a little bit differently, take a different route or something, and you might accomplish more. You might enjoy it more. Might be in it for a longer run. I don't know. I'm riffing on that one. Next one was Smeggy. Unless there's ones that we're missing, we're 2.5 hours in. We could round it up to 3. I don't know where Clover's at with time. Half the time by this time in the conversation, he's already multitasking and doing other things. So I don't know how much time he's got left, but Smeggy's saying, I was talking with my girl the other day about how people buying followers is bad for the whole industry because companies thinks there's no return on investment. I guess what you mean is when people pay for the perception of a channel with large subscribers are going to offer a return on some investment in that content creator. I'm assuming all of that. Or if maybe he means it a different way that I'm not seeing, Clover, but I don't know too many people that have done that. There's speculation on people that have done that. There's a lot of speculation when people. Here's the deal: if what time of year? At the about now, about when school goes out, whenever summer starts, spring break, that time of year, that's when YouTube does their recalibrations and they throw away 1 million channels a day on the regular. This time of year, they might throw away 40 million channels a day because they're figuring out some new logarithm changes or something, and they're just thrashing old channels out of there. Channels that are on the rise, do a virtual thing or some sort of an exploitive video where they do something funny or something trendy, they're typically going to get a lot of bots. So when someone loses 40,000 subscribers and they're not a large channel where that doesn't matter to them or that's new to them, so they do something kind of viral-ish, they get a bunch of subs, maybe some time goes on and they keep doing some things and they're getting these subs, and then YouTube makes a correction and they lose 20,000 subs, they lose 2,000 subs. Everybody's got a different, perception of a punch in the eye. When you get punched in the eye by the system at this time of year when they typically do this stuff, there's going to be people running around saying, that this is because I saw someone drop 20,000 subscribers. They were paying for them. Be careful of the people unless there's some actual like conversation going on with like, hey, I just bought 10,000 subs and here's why it was such a good idea or a bad idea. And, actually talking about it. That caveat. What do you think, Clover? I'm sure you might.
Oh, I've got a whole different, I've got a whole different perspective. But you got to realize I hang out with creators from every niche imaginable. You would be astonished at the number of channels that buy subscribers. I don't want to say that it's the rule rather than the exception, but you would be astonished, right? It happens all the freaking time. Um, Mostly because they don't realize that it means absolutely nothing. To that point, I don't know what industry Smeggy's talking about, but I have been met with very little um, talk about subscribership, and especially this year, I put forth a lot of proposals with sponsorship and ad money. That's not even a part of my packet. And there's a reason why. Most people, most in the industry, and I'm speaking to mainly the firearm industry. The other ones I can't speak to, so maybe he's talking about another niche. Um, Most of the media marketing people, they understand that. So when they're looking at the return, that's why they have things like use code CloverTac. That's why they have the affiliate link is down below. That's why they have other methods of tracking through traffic, right? Because here's the dirty little secret. Like you can have 1 million subscribers, that's cool, and you look like a big, huge channel. But when you've got 1 million subscribers and you get 100 views a video, because those are all bought, paid for bots or whatever the case may be, and they're not watching your stuff. Like you can be 1,000 subscriber channel and have a really dedicated core audience, and get 4, 5, 6 times the amount of views on a video than that 1 million subscriber channel. And companies see that and they understand that. They see the overall litany of analytics at play rather than just the subscribers. If you're entering into something with a company and all they want to look at is subscribers, you got to realize they don't know what they're talking about or what they're looking at. So they've got somebody that's green, somebody that doesn't understand media. Maybe they're old school print, newspaper ad style thinking person. Maybe that's the type of marketing school that they went to back in the day. I don't know. But I don't experience that hardly at all. And so, but the biggest thing I will say is it aggravates me when people even bring it up at this point about buying subscribers. Like, who cares? Because a subscriber number, it's the engagement is the metric. It has nothing to do with what those numbers say. Like, what type of engagement are you getting? That's what really matters when it comes down to it. And most companies I talk with, they totally get it. I had a conversation actually just yesterday with a big, huge marketing agency that I thought was new to the industry, and they're not. Well, they're not new to marketing, but they are fairly new to the industry, trying to shake some things up. And they understood the game the same way I'm explaining it here. I mean, they knew what was up. So yeah, I don't see that. He says he's talking about makeup. Okay, yeah, that may very well be. Yeah. Maybe I can't speak to that. My makeup channel hasn't taken off yet, so I expect it to any day now. So CloverTech Makeup, go check it out.
That was that one. So then Jeff was saying, I think big giveaways are effectively buying followers
And
in the
they're very,
respect that they're attracting people who are fly by night or just there for the one interest and it's not your
yep,
topic, whatever.
yep, yeah. Giveaway stuff has to be strategic, and I've preached this for a very long time. I see people still to this day that I cringe because I'm like, you don't understand what you're doing. Because they will and I get it. They want to hit that milestone, whatever it might be. So at 500 subscribers, 700 subscribers, whatever, they're like, oh, get us to 1,000. At 1,000, we're going to give away, blah blah blah. Or they're at 2,000 and at 5,000, or maybe they're at 8,000 and at 10,000, whatever. Right? It's always we're going to do this big giveaway. Help us get to this number. And yes, you're going to have people that sign on, you know, because it's very easy for them just to click a subscribe button, right? Or maybe type a comment. Um, and so, they're not going to watch your stuff. And eventually, if they're not watching their stuff, if they're not clicking the bell, if they're not, rating your channel, if they don't have, again, that engagement, that's what's important, the engagement, not the subscribe, the engagement. If they don't have it, YouTube's going to drop them as a subscriber any freaking way. Like G said, at the very, if they don't drop them before then, they'll definitely drop them. They don't just drop bots from your subscribership, but they'll purge your channel if they're like, oh, well, this guy's subscribed and he hadn't watched a video in 6 months or 8 months or since we audited the channel last time, right? However long ago that was, and typically it's months, if not a year or so. Um, then it's gonna pull the subscribers. So yeah, it means nothing. So I always say if you're gonna do that, instead of doing a giveaway to try to grow a channel, do a giveaway in appreciation of the people that got you there. So once you hit, if you've got that 12,000 milestone, just grind, just get there, and then once you get there, once you're at 1,200, 1,500, you pass that 10,000 mark, whatever it might be, by a significant number of subscribers that you're not in jeopardy of falling down below that. Um, then throw it out there and go, hey, look, all you gotta do is show up. We're gonna give away a bunch of stuff, or here's the rules for. You got to have some way to track it and to pick a winner and do all of that. So there's some semblance of structure that's going to have to be around it, of course. But you can go, look, this is an appreciation of those that got me here, right? Not a bribe to for people to come in and try to get me there, because that's, to me, that's counterproductive.
In so many ways. I won't get into it because we're like 3 hours in, but there's so many. We're calling. I'm calling this one at least. Give us some feedback on what you think the show should be called that we're doing here on Tuesdays. But I called this one Gun Channels Gun Channels Coaching or something like that. I can't see my own thumbnail, but if you're interested in specifics for your channel or for a project you're contemplating or something you're thinking about doing and you'd rather chat off air or just have whatever reasons for strategy or for embarrassment or for whatever, you just want to keep your own business, you want to chat off air with either one of us, we can be contacted. Feel free to do so. But uh, there's so many ways to think about audiences. Clover, I guess I just wanted to just be contrary / alternative, it's just to have an alternative way, but not to be contrary as much as just to show that there's a lot of different spectrum here. There's more than just two options, but What Clover's talking about is YouTube. Let's say somebody was trying to impress a local gun shop and they needed a bunch of subs for whatever reason to impress that local gun shop, and then that accomplished whatever they needed, and now they've got the role as social media person for the local gun shop. And I'm just trying to be weird and vague, right? So now they're the social media person for the local gun shop, because there's not that many people have manufacturers, and ranges don't care about that kind of stuff. But a gun shop might be competing for search engine ranking or something. So if somebody goes and buys a bunch of subs or whatever and shows that they can accomplish it, they accomplished it, right? And it's not necessarily deceptive, especially if they're open about it and say, hey, look, it's as easy as this. Now, is it something I'd recommend? No. And here's why. I can show you why for all the stuff Clover just said. I'm not recommending it. I'm just saying that is a way that you could capitalize on the effort, capitalize on the instance without actually needing to reap the benefits in an actual way on the platform that you're doing it to. And it's not good. It's jeopardizing not just your standing on the platform, but also. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're right. There's way more risk than gain, but I'll tell you why it's elusive. There are channels that succeed with doing it. Now let me just give you the 30,000-foot view of how they do it. They'll buy subs, which will get them that brand deal or whatever, right? Even though, in my opinion, that brand or whatever, they don't have a good marketing people. They don't understand the game if they're playing.
It doesn't matter.
There's that way. But it doesn't matter.
They're seeking the people who don't.
Well, I get you,
know.
but I get you, I get you. But let me finish. Here's the way they succeed. It's not the buying subs that cause their channel to grow. It's they needed the subs. It's the same as if I was to go. Well, I had this problem. There's been times in my life where I had to go to some type of school to get some type of paperwork to do some type of job or get some type of contract. Right? It's the same.
You needed
thing.
a credential.
Right. It's the same type thing. Right? They wanted this brand deal. They needed a certain subscriber count to get said brand deal. They did that. They bought the subscribers. They ended up getting the brand deal. They worked hard on the brand deal, which caused the growth on their channel. It wasn't the subscribers. The subscribers was a means to an end, is what I'm saying. But that is that type of method, and especially depending on the niche, is definitely the exception rather than the rule, and not recommended. If you get brands that want to harp on the subscriber count and they don't dig deeper into your channel analytics and look at the true meat of what you bring to the table. And this is also when we talk about elevator speeches, we've talked about it on past shows, especially leading up to SHOT. When we talk about elevator speeches and talking with companies, you want to understand your analytics too. Don't fall back and fall into that trap of subscriber count. That means squat. Talk about the meat and potatoes of substance, right? And that's the way to do it and mitigate any of the risk that comes with buying subscribers. But anyway, I wanted to point out that like Sneggy was saying that there was one channel that did it and it worked or whatever, and I'm like, yeah, I mean it can, but that's rare.
Yeah, like I said, there's lots of ways that you can play with that. They all have their. Well, we could have another conversation. So Jeff clarified from a previous thing that we hit, I don't know, 45 minutes ago. The interesting business example was that we're in a business of finding the interesting things for the audience. And that's a great, great, great point. You can have somebody on and say, hey, I do a show. You can be on my show. You can show up at this time on this day and you can talk about your product. And then you show up and you give them a link and you stand there and you introduce them and you give them the time and then you say thank you and then you end it, right? But how different is that than, and plus we've had this conversation when we started this show about how do you approach somebody at SHOT Show out of the blue? How do you get cold call somebody at SHOT Show? You can walk up and go, you can be on my show. You can be on my show at this date. You can have 25 minutes on my show, right? Or you can say, I'm super interested in that folding 22 that is totally different than the other ones on the market. It totally looks like it's made differently and it's like engineered differently than others. You've done some things that are pretty solid, and then you've incorporated an aftermarket accessory that's not just been popular, but would be even more popular if it was incorporated into the entire design of the gun. It wasn't just an afterthought, kind of, little, screwed on the edge. So, right, if you go up and have that conversation with somebody, they might be like, oh, this person actually pays attention to it, and they understand why we put this thing together, and they have some shared interest in this thing succeeding, and they care to get this message out. And of all the places in the entire show, they walked all the way to the downstairs, all the way to the back corner, and they waited out there twice for you to talk to me about this little tiny revolver that folds up and has 5 rounds, and it's very much like this giant popular brand that was the 5th largest selling gun on Gunbroker last year. Let me try to remember how to reject this spam call. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a way to approach them, and there's a way to have the podcast go, right? Hey, you want to be on our podcast? And like I was kind of saying, you can have 25 minutes of our podcast, or I'm enthralled by this little gun. I need to know all about who came up with it, why you came up with it, where you're designing it, because I'll bet you it's not coming from the place in Tennessee where all the other ones are being forged, right? Like, come on and tell us all about that. Well, how did you get this plastic made? Like, who did the engineering of the plastic and metal? It's almost like, somebody really knows what's up, because usually a company sticks with what they're comfortable with, metal, or they stick with what they're comfortable with, polymer. But incorporating two where you don't always do that in every gun, like, how challenging was that, right? Like, that's a different kind of interview than you can have 25 minutes of my show. Anyway, that was from that interesting things before. I don't know if you want to riff on that 3 hours in. He's probably looking up a mini revolver that folds and has 5-shot double 22 Magnum and 22 long rifle cylinder, from what I understand.
Nah, I was out there replying to Jeff with some stuff in the back chat, just off topic or whatever, just elaboration.
All right, so then the next one is entertainment. If you aren't entertaining, nobody will watch. That's a great point. And I think about that river again, and the people who go down the river and make a bunch of noise, let's say shooting off fireworks, putting up a big banner, swimming in the river while they're going by. They have a horse swimming next to them or something. Like, they did something to make everybody look over there. They're going to learn from that. And a whole bunch of people who are like watching go, oh, snap, if I throw a horse in the water next to me, everybody's going to look. I'm bringing 2 horses. I'm going to get everybody to look at me. And then they try that, and people are like, boo, what are you doing to those horses? Those people can do it, but you shouldn't even have put 1 horse in the water. Well, nobody's going to put a horse in the water, right? Like, that's what you end up with when you're entertaining people. So I get you. Yes, you have to be entertaining to entertain people, but that weird self-promoting situation isn't necessarily conducive to, I want to get information out there. So if you go up to somebody and say, let's get you as be a guest on my show, and I'm going to be the coolest, hippest, trendiest thing. We're going to talk for 15 minutes, and I'm going to get you some gotchas, right? You're going to really get a pie in the face. These people are going to love this. Or we're going to do the Joe Rogan. We're going to chat for 4 hours. We're going to just chat. You're going to have a great time. We're going to do some stuff to get a lot of people in there. They're going to ask the questions. We're going to find out what people, we're going to give away stuff in this 4-hour interview, so that I am going to get as many people as I've ever had to a show. And we're going to get so much feedback for you about your products, because we're going to encourage people with giveaways to ask us questions. So not only are you going to spend some time with us, but we're going to get all kinds of information about your products from your audience, from your customers. And we're going to be able to address it. And we're going to be able to pull shorts. We're going to be able to pull clips. We're going to be able to pull separate videos. Like, we're going to be creating a gold mine for the next 4 hours. People who care about the in-depth, they're going to get that from you. They are going to care so much. They're going to know so much about what they care about. And all those people who are superficial and just don't have time or just don't care are going to have the sound bites that they are desperate for. We're going to accomplish all of that, right? Like, I'm saying? That can be your goal, and that can be entertaining, but that's not going to be entertaining to everybody. So I hear you. But then I look at it also is if, let's say you're trying to watch some footage of World War II. Do you want to watch some Desi Arnaz, Lucy Ball, whatever that show was, and say that's representational of the 1950s? Do you want to watch a newsreel and say that's representational of the 1950s? Or do you want to watch footage, let's say that there was cell phone footage of from the trenches or from the cockpit of World War II? Depending on what you want, you're going to go seek those things out. So, what are you creating? Are you creating cockpit footage of the Second Amendment in 2023, like Susan is? Are you creating the Desi Arnaz show or whatever, Lucy Ball show, where it's a parody of bullshit and it's a mockery of everything that's institutional and foundational? And yes, it can be a determination, but it's some weird alien misinterpretation of the sarcasm and the parody, right? Or are you a news thing, which is propaganda potentially, right? Or are you an ad, right? Are you an ad? So what are you building? So yeah, you can be entertaining and you won't be entertaining, but what are you building? If you go to the customer, you go to the client, you go to the person, you go to the project, and you say, yes, you're doing important work. And I am not going to get you views, but I'm going to archive 2023 February what you're doing. We're not going to get a ton of eyeballs, but we're going to create something that exists. And nobody else is going to offer you that. Are they going to spend an hour or two with you? So, and you can do both. You could have a channel that's entertaining as hell. I'm going to throw a pie in your face. Once we get comfortable with each other, I'm going to have you sit down for an hour and tell you, and you can tell the world why you do what you do. You can do both. All right, Clover, you go ahead.
Well, I was going to reply to that real simple and just say that entertainment and what people find entertaining is subjective. So, like, for some people, it can be droning and monotonous if it's super informational. I watch a lot of things on like space and the galaxy and physics and things of that nature. And a lot of times it's not like crazy stuff going on, like you're laughing and you're crying and you're that sort of thing. But I find the absorption of knowledge, entertaining. So it's yeah. Some people like your example with the horses, right? Like yeah, some people like that, some people don't like that, right? And so it may be fine for some other person to do that because they can pull it off in a way that there's a certain segment of the audience out there that likes that sort of thing. Doesn't mean you're going to be able to do that in the same exact way. So, um, I do agree that you have to hold people's attention, but I don't know that um, entertainment is necessarily the right word, right?
Oh, sorry to leave you hanging. I'm sitting here rubbing my one eye and trying to read the chat. There's a bunch of people saying stuff. So here's the deal. 3 hours in, I'm not even apologizing. This is what it is. If we had an intern, I would be tasking them with going in and pulling all these good stuff and taking it out and making it standalone videos. And then we'd be developing that even further. So if you're interested in being an intern, if you're interested in getting paid, I'll start paying somebody if you can seriously come to the table with some time and some ability to learn some stuff, because we probably could rip this 3 hour chunk apart and do exactly what I was talking about. Take it into manageable pieces, useful pieces for people, to at least give them a morsel to chew on, if not something to really use, right? Some real insight. You guys are having a conversation. I'm just not even sure what to click or whatever. Maybe you
I wouldn't
decide
worry
what you
about
want
it.
to bring up. Okay.
Yeah, it's all inside stuff. I wouldn't worry about it. Kind of talking about the giveaway thing and just facilitation on the backside of that more than anything. Not really worth bringing up, I don't think.
All right. So G23 said, Clover, I do my thank you giveaways. I do them during my live stream and very random.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and Chris from the 740, same thing. He says one of his biggest regrets was doing the giveaways to get subs up. So, there you go.
Well, when did he do giveaways? Well, you weren't giving away like guns and cert pistols. You were giving away like stickers and like thanks for being here tonight. Here, let's have some fun type of let's use the random thing. Or am I missing something and you did bigger efforts that I missed or something?
What? We talking about Chris in the
Yes.
740?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess he was. Apparently, he did. He said he did. So,
Well,
like,
that's what I'm wondering. Perception, right? Like if he means the stickers and stuff, like I don't think anybody think that's not you're not bringing tons of subs that way. But I don't know. Well, my thing was I remember when I was in my formative times, not formative on the internet, but formative with the first, second group of YouTubers. I guess I'm gonna start thinking of them as epochs of gun tubers on YouTube, gun people on YouTube. The first of us were all just amateur playing around, right? And then it became serious, and that second group of people to get serious started, maybe even third. I have to think about it for a minute. I don't want to pull up Professor Yamane and just start saying from my perspective. But in reality, I'm going to say the second wave of exploiters, the people that came in, they were unsuccessful in other parts of the world, like let's say selling used cars or maybe beanbag things that were copyrighted or trademarked. And then were unsuccessful selling that kind of stuff. So they decided, oh, I'm going to take my limited skill set that I'm not that good at and apply it towards gun community, who's basically just sitting there being gullible, has a ton of money, isn't using the internet very well, and isn't using it pretty much at all. So untapped resource. And when I was in an off-air conversation, and Artisan Tony, for people that don't know, Artisan Tony has been around the gun community online, on YouTube at least, and online for a long, long time since the beginning, and been a big part of that, instrumental part of that in a lot of ways, because a lot of the people that exist today were created or forged in the off-air chats. We talked about the off-air chats being powerful. Literally, people that are making, I don't even want to think about how much money these assholes are making. But I met a lot of people who I do not like because I knew them from back in those days, and I saw how they were designing their channels, engineering their machines. I don't call them that for a reason, but anyway, one of the strategies back then, and I'm not going to use, I don't think there's any way for anybody to remember this anymore. They would go to Facebook and buy subs. We're talking about buying subs. Buy 10,000, 100,000. They bought them 10,000 at a time on Facebook. Once they would buy 10,000 and gain some, because part of that game is if you gain a bunch of subs because you're doing something, people look around and go, oh, I got here when it was at 10,000 and now it's at 20,000. Oh, and now it's at 50,000. So there is organic growth there, and the organic growth can be 10% to 20%, and that's a ton of people chatting with each other in the group, right? Oh, look, the thing went to 70,000 and I went to 80,000. Look how many more people are chatting. Oh, when it goes live, we're at 100 people. This was a long time ago. So when we go live, it was at 300 people. Live chats were at a different scale back then. So you could have relatively few people interacting, and it could seem like a lot. And they knew how to play that game, and they were doing that with intent. Like I say, they were unsuccessful in other realms doing that. When you're trying to be cool in front of people that are dancing or playing music, like if you suck, then you just suck, right? You have to actually be competitive there. If you come over where nobody is competing, then all you got to do is exist. So what they would do is buy subs, parlay that, leverage that to more subs, and then drop last year's model of handguard or rail or stock or whatever company was about to quit selling this. They'd offload it to that, let's say 20,000 organic people with wrapped around 100,000 fake accounts, right? So 100 and something thousand. Well, if you're only trying to sell 1,000 units, you make $5 every time one sells. You just made $5,000, and that was in the day. So that $5,000 was worth a little bit more. So yeah, there was some people engineering this and using that kind of stuff, and the giveaways and the discounts and stuff were all just marketing tools / advertising campaign. What is that called? Tactics.
Yeah.
No, going on a tangent there, I guess. But
nowadays, the discount codes, for those that don't know, and I said this earlier, nowadays your discount codes that you see, they're more a tracking thing, than they are anything.
But I guess Chris was talking about buying stuff. I can't see Chris doing anything to that level where it was an intentional, like if we can buy 10,000 more and that'll gain us 4,000 more and we will sell out. I don't want to keep getting into too much because everybody will figure out who I'm ranting about. But let's do, if we can get to this many thousand real subs wrapped inside of this burrito of, sorry, mushroom burrito, of, uh, you know, 20,000, 40,000, 50,000. It didn't really matter how many fake subs because they were just there as window dressing so that the real subs felt comfortable. They could drop a widget. Doesn't matter what the widget is, a hat. If the hat costs something and they got $5 profit on it, then you drop that hat on 40,000 people. You're selling 10,000 hats, maybe, you get the hype going and,
Right.
Boom. You say, hey, I'm getting the hype going. You buy 10 or 20,000 more subs. It looks like a ton of more people or everybody's anticipating that drop. It's a way to exploit the community. There's people who I will not deal with because that's their strategy, and they'll say anything, they'll do anything to get that little bit of organic because it doesn't take much. I'm telling you, it does not take much. I've got a crowdfunding campaign going. I need 140 people to raise $7,000. That's nothing in the big scheme of things, but that's a shit ton of money, right? 140 people is all it takes. I mean, I don't know if I'll reach that. I hope I will. But there's people that are definitely reaching more than $140. And how often are they reaching out with something to sell? There's a lot of ways to make money out here. There's ways to make money that create and build, and there's ways to make money that exploit and just lay waste. What's the end result? Has guns become normalized after what you're doing out there? I guess that's too much to lay on everybody 3 hours in.
Yeah. Right.
So thanks to G23 for existing, for hosting a live conversation. Thanks to Chris for existing and hosting a live conversation. Neither of your subs are, one, what you're worth. You don't have as many subs as you're worth, is what I'm trying to say. But
Yep.
your subs are not there because you paid for them or you bought them or you somehow scammed them into it. It's because you're putting forth tremendous effort to keep a community together that's highly valued. It's not valued every day or every week, but it's valued at times. And it doesn't exist whenever you turn the light on. It only exists when it's fostered and incubated. And it takes that effort, that deliberate effort that isn't easy to do weekly for
Yep.
regular people.
Right.
Some of us have Patreon. Oh, I should be running my Patreon banner. I mean, I'm not regular. It's just that I've got Patreon. A bunch of people buy me a cup of coffee. A bunch of people buy Clover a cup of coffee. If I had 1,000 Patreons that bought me a cup of coffee, $5, I'd be live constantly. I'd be able to do all kinds of stuff. I'd have not interns. I'd have paid employees. I'm not at that level yet. I'm at 100 something Patreons, but do the math. Enough people contribute a little, it allows a lot of effort to take place. Massive, massive power there. Getting back to that entertainment thing and getting away to giveaways and stuff. And to say thanks to Chris and to G23 and Gizzard, he's out there, and Rick and Travis. Who am I missing? Ghost. Well, Ghost does more live shows in front of people than he used to host some stuff. Every once in a while, he'll throw a link out to everybody, but the people that are hosting those live round tables, that's what keeps everything together.
So, we're over 3 hours and we need to get out of here in a few minutes, but, bringing up, and there was some talk out there, YouTube memberships, Patreon, patrons. And so, I just want to bring up something, and this is more for the creator side and an understanding of something. So it can get discouraging sometimes. You see channels that are, 100,000 subs, right? And, you're like, man, if I just had those subs, right, I could do those things. This goes back into the subs don't matter. You think, oh man, if I just had the subs, I could do, I could go to places they go, the factory tours, or, man, I'd get the opportunity to go shoot that machine gun or ride that tank or do this or do that, right? What you don't realize is their subs are not allowing them to do that. They've got 2, 3, 4, 500, as G was saying, 1,000 people kicking in as a YouTube channel member, or kicking in as a Patreon patron, right? And so the the thing is, if you've got thousands, tens of thousands even of subscribers, right? If you could just find a way or whatever, or if those viewers would see the value in them jumping on board one of those mechanisms to, add that money into the coffers to be able to do those things. You could be a I don't know, 5, 10, 15,000, 20,000 subscriber channel doing the things that the 100,000 subscriber channels are doing. Like one does not have to do with the other, I guess is what I'm saying. And especially if you're organically grown, right? I think you have a more of an opportunity to foster those types of relationships with the folks that reach out and actually support your content and what you're doing.
Last one is probably getting adjacent to whatever you guys were chatting about, but I couldn't figure out where the conversation was going, just specific out there or whatever. But you were replying to Gear Report saying sometimes sometimes Clover thinks companies use the subscription number excuse as a cover that they just don't want to work with you for some other reason, and it's an easy thing to point at for you people that don't have enough subs. Well, one thing is you could have more subs. Why don't you try having more subs, and then you would have to worry about
Right.
this.
Yeah. True. Yeah. You could go
So
buy the subs to fix
subs
that problem.
happen. People get subs. Keeping subs is different, right? Whatever subs, blah blah blah. Going into what Clover said, but I don't know. Like I said, was that just adjacent to whatever you guys were talking about, or like, is there anything?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, yeah, it is. Like, and this is, I've just seen this through various, again, some of my stuff I have to caveat, or you have to be really careful to not tie it in directly to the firearm niche, right? But I've seen some instances where, the type of content that somebody puts out, that company doesn't like. And rather than going, we really don't like your content. We don't like your cursing. We don't like, some of the lewdness and childish stuff you do or whatever, right? And instead of saying that, they go, oh, yeah, we don't work with anybody below 5,000 subscribers or 10,000 subscribers or whatever. I have seen things like that take place between creators, whatever you want
I've
to call
been
them in the industry.
I've been told by highly paid people that make at least 5 times more than I do every month. I've been told that you shouldn't put dog pictures on the internet, especially in Second Amendment content. I've literally been lectured by people that make 5 times more than me that I shouldn't put this dog on. So maybe I should take that advice.
Yeah, but
Triggered.
yeah.
Sorry, that's not my mute. That's my camera.
So
Triggered.
anyway, let's get out of here.
So then Tony said subscribers don't necessarily translate to views. They can go stagnant.
Yep.
Yeah. That would be another conversation for sure.
Engagement is what you need to be looking at per metrics. Engagement. Mushroom burrito.
This dog has holsters, actually. Whenever I have time to do it, I actually sat down as a project a long time ago and made a bunch of leather holsters in different ways from all my NAAs, because it actually costs a ton of money to try to make or to get holsters for all those NAAs. So I ended up having a lot of fun back when I was still making YouTube money, I think, playing around with a bunch of holsters. So they exist, and they are definitely perfect size for him. And he has a harness. So it's just a matter of me going in the other room, opening up a thing, looking for a thing, grabbing him in here, and then making a video. I'm just, on my list of priorities, that is not the number one. I'll probably end up doing it now that I've just thought about how easy it would be to do all that.
He obviously needs a pug, right?
Well, let's just say this dog already has 2 pugs. Let's just say this dog ain't hurting for no pugs.
There you go.
I did give away my blackjacks. I didn't give away. Jimmy earned them a long time ago when Jimmy was the co-host. I gave him my blackjacks and my little blackjack holster dealie I made. I made like a behind the back, like in the movies, they'll put 2 guns pointing towards each other in the small of your back. I made like a holster like that, but for a sweatshirt pocket, right? And then it had like a flashlight in there. And so it's essentially cool kid, what do you call that? Appendix, except for fat kid appendix. It's in your sweatshirt pocket. But then you reach in and you pull out a blackjack. A blackjack is a black NAA Magnum, for people that don't know. It was a black anodized, or I don't know what they do to them. Whatever you do to make a stainless steel black. But they were all black with black grips. And then I put pug grips on them, which is the rubber over molded grips from Hogue. And then I made this black holster. I've got pictures of it somewhere. I'll put up pictures somewhere, but I think they're all long gone. He had to pay bills with them, I'm pretty sure. But that's the nature of not having any interest at all in playing those river games with people that like to shoot frying pans or iPhones or, do crazy bullshit that doesn't normalize guns necessarily. So getting back to it, we're done, right? 3 hours, 19 minutes. I'm going to suggest checking out Toby from Cape Gunworks is going to be live with the Grace Curley show. Grace Curley is essentially like a version of Rush Limbaugh. She does like a political commentary show, kind of pointing at the news and bringing people on. And one of the segments that she does each week is 2A Tuesday, and it's a 45-minute segment where she brings on Toby from Cape Gunworks in Massachusetts, and as many people as can call into the radio show and ask Toby questions either about Massachusetts law specifically or just guns in general. And he's got about the best ability to take questions from all over and, answer them. Sometimes he'll ramble a little bit, but nowhere near as much as us two. He does a great job. At the same time, they broadcast that or simulcast that on YouTube and Rumble, and they're paying attention to the comments. They do the best job of any of the live radio shows that I'm aware of. The 4 or 5 that I listen to on the regular, they do the most interactive, like they are the most interactive with their audiences. So it's the most fun to check out, and it's reaching the most people. You're in a interactive text conversation with people who are in Massachusetts on the radio with people in Boston who are reaching, Rush Limbaugh level, pretty large audience, the largest show in the region, from what I understand, radio show. So that's a 45-minute segment talking about Second Amendment and guns. And you literally have a pipeline to that. It's really neat. It's kind of like when those of us who do ham radio started to do ham radio on the internet. It's just sort of a neat, like holding the phone up to the telephone, holding the telephone up to the television, just kind of double up on technology kind of thing that you can be part of. Anyway, then what? Ghost has a show later on today. You know what the topic is?
Haven't gotten it yet, so I don't know.
So Riding Shotgun with Charlie looks like he just posted something. Our friend Tony Simon has a project going where he's for every $5 you'd offer to the Diversity Shoot project, you're in the running for an SB tactical brace. So I'm going to try to find Diversity Shoot while I talk. You know what I should do is get a link tree set up for my live chats that I could use as a quick link. You know what I'm saying? So that when I'm doing a live chat, I can just always go to that link tree, like a specific one that's just set up so that I can copy and paste, essentially have a cloud version of a notepad that I can access while I'm live like this, instead of having to, this is something I do almost every show, is have to go find people's links, unless DJ's out there. DJ helps everybody with that. Anyway, Tony's trying to get himself to Phoenix this weekend. The 18th is our Second Amendment rally, our 10th annual Second Amendment rally. In fact, it's so large that it took over the park now. It's going to be pretty interesting, except for those of us that parked at the park. So it's larger. Tony's going to be one of many speakers. He hasn't even got his, we're still going to try to help Tony out here. So he has his airfare, and that's it. Let's put it that way. So if you're interested in helping our friend out, Tony's the dude that does the Ask Gun Questions with us on Saturdays. He's also the host since 2015 of orientation and familiarization opportunity for new shooters in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and he's taken that show on the road a few times. In fact, he's attempting to arrange one of his diversity shoot opportunities in Phoenix while he's here. But anyway, he's trying to raise money for the project, and every $5 gets you in on a SB tactical brace of some sort, trying to keep it trendy. And we'll probably have others that throw into that pool to encourage folks to help him out. So I don't know if he has a goal in mind as much as, he's footing the bill, so everything helps. So I threw a link out there to Diversity Shoot. I tell you what, as soon as I get a username and password, that website will look a lot different, hopefully a lot better. But right now, just go over to the right, and there's a link to his PayPal. And I believe any way you send funds via PayPal or whatnot over there, he'll get them and he'll appreciate it. What am I missing, Clover? There's something else big that I wanted to mention. Yankees pets and vets thing? No. Yeah, pets for. No, it's not the vets. It's his Finn's fur and whatever, his pets rescue thing where he got his puppies from. He does a thing on Valentine's to raise funds for that. Some of those things are about $15, and that gets you an entry for something, I guess. But mainly it's to raise funds for the shelter where Yankee got his puppies at. And then I guess I should mention we've got that sewing machine project that we're working on over at Indiegogo. I'll quit saying stuff on my end. Clover's got 22 interviews scheduled. I bet you didn't know about this if you're listening to this 3.5 hours in. But for the record, why don't you mention these 22 interviews, which is actually the reason we're even doing this topic today. So you can end it, and then we'll end it.
It's true. Yeah, record time. The spots filled up for this season of the podcast for sure. I'm scrolling down to see. I actually got a community post where I listed them out because I don't have them all on the channel page yet. They're not all scheduled in StreamYard and on YouTube just yet, but I do have them on my schedule. But yeah, this week we've got Outstandards tomorrow. That battery bank that looks like an AR magazine. That's from Outstandards. So, and then I think they got a couple other products as well. And so going to have those guys on this week, tomorrow actually. And then I've got Jake with Noggin Notes Podcast, Zephyr Wellness, and Walk the Talk America. That'll be here on the podcast on Thursday. And then we've got.
Isn't that the intersection of firearms and mental health?
A little bit, right? Then we got Patriot Firearms School. We'll have Meet the Pressers, Infinite Defense. I'm just going to throw some names out there. USA Clay Target League, Hootie Hoo, Bursa, Great Start Shooting School, Ride Shotgun with Charlie, 2A4E, Women Who Carry, The Honest Truth, Cake Gun Works, Texas Gun Owners Association, BRG USA, Right to Bear, We Like Shooting, Gabby Franco, Anderson Manufacturing, Gear Report, and European American Armory rounds out the early 23 podcast season. So a lot of stuff, cross section between industry and advocates and channels and creators and all kinds of people doing all kinds of things out there in the firearm world. So, and condolences to Hoff and his family, man. That's tough.
People that aren't keeping up or that aren't aware. I mean, talk about I think tragic is the only way to describe the events of the last couple of years for that family and for I'm sure the friends and those who care. So sorry to hear, but in another way, it's probably it wasn't comfortable, I'm sure.
Yep.
All right, with that, we're going to end this one. Thanks everybody for listening, and and then let's not forget Barbecue does his show this afternoon or this evening for everybody as well.